Hey friends, glad you're here at Bald Voldemorty. We've cooked up something special. What if Professor X took Harry from the Dursleys and trained him as the strongest Omega mutant at Hogwarts? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1. The boy they didn't know. The garden at number 4, Privet Drive, was the kind of garden that won neighborhood awards. Vernon Dursley made sure of that. The hedges were trimmed to geometric precision. The lawn was striped with the obsessive regularity of a man who controlled what he could. And the flower beds bloomed in coordinated colors that the neighbors admired and subtly envied. It was, by every suburban metric, a perfect garden. The boy sitting in the dirt beside the garden shed did not belong to this picture. He was small for 6, too small, really, the kind of small that came from skipped meals and stunted sleep rather than genetics. His dark hair stuck out in every direction as though it had simply given up, and his glasses were held together at the bridge with a piece of tape that had been there long enough to yellow. He was wearing a shirt that could have fit a man twice his size, and he was very carefully, very quietly, doing absolutely nothing that would draw attention. His name was Harry Potter, and he had learned early that being noticed meant trouble. The cupboard under the stairs was his bedroom. He had known this since he was old enough to understand what a bedroom was, in the same matter-of-fact way he had known that Dudley got 2 bedrooms and Harry got the one with the spider and the broken latch. These were simply the facts of his world. He did not cry about them anymore. Crying drew attention. He was watching a beetle navigate a pebble when the car pulled up. It wasn't a remarkable car, a sensible dark blue sedan, the kind that disappeared in traffic. But the man who stepped out of it was not a man who disappeared anywhere. He moved with the unhurried authority of someone who had long ago stopped worrying about what other people thought, which was a thing Harry had never seen before and found immediately fascinating. The man was in a wheelchair, which Harry noticed with the frank curiosity of a child rather than the studied non-reaction of an adult, and he had a quality that Harry couldn't name yet, a kind of stillness that wasn't passivity. It was the stillness of deep water. He was looking directly at Harry, not past him, not through him, at him, with calm blue eyes that carried the specific weight of someone who had seen something unexpected and was taking a moment to appreciate it properly. Harry didn't run. He thought about it. Running was usually a good idea when adults looked at him too long, but something about this man made running feel unnecessary. Not safe, exactly, just unnecessary. "Hello," the man said. His voice was a warm baritone educated with a faint American accent threaded through it. "You must be Harry." "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers," Harry said. "That's very sensible." The man smiled, and it reached his eyes. "My name is Charles Xavier. I'm a professor. I study people with unusual abilities." He paused. "I think you might know what I mean by that." Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the flower bed 6 feet to his left, where 3 roses had slowly, silently turned to face them during the course of the conversation, the way sunflowers track the sun, though roses don't do that. "I didn't mean to do that," Harry said. His voice was carefully neutral. This was the thing he was most afraid of, the thing that made Aunt Petunia's face go white and Vernon's go red. "I know," Xavier said, "but I'd like to talk about what you do mean to do when you're ready." The roses were still watching. Charles Xavier had been tracking unusual psionic signatures for 15 years. Cerebro, the machine he'd built to extend his own considerable telepathic range, had picked up something 3 days ago that had made him go very still in his office chair and ask his assistant to cancel his afternoon appointments. Most mutant signatures he found were clean, a single activated gene, a single power blossoming into existence, detectable and mappable and comprehensible within the framework he'd spent decades building. This signature was not clean. It was layered. There was the unmistakable pattern of emerging telepathy, unfocused, instinctive, the kind that manifested in children as knowing things they shouldn't, hearing feelings instead of words. Beneath that was something kinetic, a capacity for telekinetic force that the readings suggested was vast in a way that made him recalibrate his instruments twice to make sure he wasn't misreading them. And beneath all of that was something else. something that didn't match any mutant profile in his database, that seemed to exist in a slightly different register than normal psionic energy, as though the boy was carrying two entirely different kinds of fire in the same small body. He had driven to Surrey the next morning. He spent 3 hours with Harry that first day, most of it in the garden because Harry wouldn't go inside while the Dursleys were home and Charles didn't push. He asked questions, listened more than he spoke, and by the end of the second hour he understood 2 things clearly. First, that this child was one of the most extraordinarily gifted individuals he had ever encountered in any sense of the word. And second, that the people who were supposed to love him had instead spent 6 years quietly, systematically teaching him that the most remarkable things about him were the most shameful. Harry had listened to Charles talk about the Xavier Institute with the focused, serious attention of a child who had never been given something they wanted and was afraid to want it. "Are there other kids there?" he'd asked. "Many. Do they know about the—" Harry gestured vaguely at the roses, which had returned to their normal orientation, visibly self-conscious. "Yes, most of them have their own version of that." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Do they get in trouble for it?" "No," Charles said simply. "They get taught." The process of removing Harry from the Dursleys' custody was not quick, but Charles Xavier was not a man who lacked resources, lawyers, or the kind of quiet institutional influence that moved things without making noise. What he also had, and used with the specific ethical precision he applied to all uses of his ability, was the capacity to sit across from Vernon Dursley and understand within 30 seconds that the man wanted Harry gone and was only holding on out of obligation to appearances and a vague fear of what people would think. Charles didn't manipulate him. He simply made the legal process easy, made clear that he could make the whole arrangement look exactly as Vernon would want it to look, and let the man's own desires do the rest. 3 weeks after the drive to Surrey, Harry Potter arrived at the Xavier Institute for Gifted Youngsters with a single backpack containing 3 items: a change of clothes, a photograph of a woman with dark red hair and bright green eyes, and a toy soldier with a missing arm that he refused to discuss. He stood in the entrance hall, which was all warm wood and high ceilings and the sound of someone laughing somewhere in the east wing, and looked around with those careful eyes that had already learned to find exits. Then a girl with red hair came down the stairs, saw him, and said, "You must be Harry, I'm Jean. Come on, I'll show you where everything is before Charles starts being formal about it." Harry followed her without hesitation. This, later, would make perfect sense to everyone who knew them both. The next 5 years were not a montage. They were specific. They were the morning 3 weeks after Harry arrived when Jean found him sitting outside at 4 a.m. because the dreams had come again. The green light, the laughing that wasn't funny. And instead of telling him to go back to bed, she sat beside him and said nothing for 20 minutes, which was somehow exactly right. They were Ororo Munro, whom Harry called Storm within a week because she asked him to, teaching him that control wasn't about suppression. It was about direction. She had him practice in the garden through all 4 seasons, learning to feel the difference between power that came from fear and power that came from choice. The plants around him grew in elaborate spiraling patterns when he was relaxed, which she said was beautiful, and threw themselves toward the nearest wall when he was startled, which she said was also information. They were Logan, who had absolutely no interest in teaching and said so loudly and regularly, but who somehow always seemed to be in the training room when Harry was working on physical conditioning, and who taught him 3 things by demonstration rather than instruction. That pain was data, not a verdict. That size was a variable, not a constant, and that the most dangerous thing in any room was the person who'd already decided they were going to be fine. Logan never said any of these things. Harry watched him and figured them out. They were Scott Summers running Harry through tactical scenario after tactical scenario, patient in the specific way of someone who understood that discipline was a gift rather than a punishment, teaching Harry to think 3 moves ahead, not because Harry was going to be a soldier, but because a mind that could plan was a mind that could also choose when not to. They were Charles, in the late evenings, in the study that smelled of old books and Earl Grey, teaching Harry the ethics of his own power with the same seriousness he'd have applied to any other profound responsibility. There was a conversation they had when Harry was 8 that Harry would return to for the rest of his life, about the difference between knowing what someone was thinking and deciding what to do with that knowledge, about the fact that the capacity to look inside a person's mind was not an invitation to do so, and that the self-restraint required was not weakness but the very foundation of trust. Harry had asked, with the directness of an 8-year-old, "But what if I need to know? What if someone's going to get hurt?" Charles had considered this carefully. Then you weigh the harm of not knowing against the harm of the violation. You make the best choice you can, and you don't pretend it was easy afterward. What if you make the wrong choice? Then you learn from it, and you carry it, and you do better. Charles had looked at him steadily. That's what conscience is, Harry, not the absence of wrong choices, the willingness to reckon with them. Harry had thought about this for several days before concluding, with the methodical thoroughness that was becoming his defining intellectual characteristic, that Charles Xavier was the wisest person he had ever met. He did not say this to Charles. He thought it very clearly in his immediate surface thoughts on 2 separate occasions, which amounted to the same thing. Charles had smiled both times, said nothing, and continued grading papers. Harry's powers developed along 2 tracks simultaneously, which fascinated Charles from a purely scientific standpoint and occasionally alarmed Jean from a sisterly one. The psionic track was textbook omega progression, early telepathic sensitivity deepening into genuine range and clarity, the telekinetic capacity scaling in ways that kept requiring them to update their benchmarks. By the time Harry was 9, he could hold 15 separate objects in precise telekinetic suspension while simultaneously carrying on a conversation and monitoring the surface thoughts of everyone in the room, which wasn't a party trick. It was the kind of multitasking that indicated a fundamental restructuring of how his mind allocated its resources. The other track was harder to categorize. It expressed itself in ways that felt almost biological, plants growing toward him, weather systems near him developing minor irregularities during emotional spikes, objects occasionally moving not because he directed them, but because the space around him seemed to respond to his emotional state, as though he existed in a slight but constant gravitational negotiation with reality. Charles had theories. He was careful to keep them as theories until he had better data. What he knew for certain was that, when Harry Potter was 11 years old, standing 5'4" in the training room in a gray Xavier Institute t-shirt with his dark hair still doing whatever it wanted, he was the most powerful individual Charles had ever trained. What he also knew, and this mattered more to him, was that Harry was kind. Not in the soft, apologetic way of someone who used kindness as a shield. In the active, considered way of someone who had decided, explicitly and deliberately, that the most important application of his capabilities was the reduction of unnecessary suffering wherever he encountered it. Charles had raised him well. He had never been entirely sure he would. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late July. Harry was in the kitchen eating toast when Aurora came in holding it with the expression of someone carrying something interesting and slightly baffling. It wasn't an owl. Harry received it the same way the rest of the non-magical world would have, via Charles's network of contacts, because a Hogwarts admissions owl arriving at the Xavier Institute would have raised questions nobody had the time for. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, addressed in emerald green ink in a handwriting that looked like it had been written by someone who took the act of writing very seriously. Mr. H. Potter, the kitchen table, Xavier Institute for Gifted Youngsters, Westchester, New York. Harry read it twice. Then he went to find Charles. Charles read it once with the expression he used when something confirmed a hypothesis he'd been sitting on for several years without sufficient evidence to act on. "You knew about this," Harry said. "It wasn't an accusation." "I knew there was something else in your signature that I couldn't fully account for," Charles said. I had suspicions. I wasn't certain. He set the letter on his desk. How do you feel about it? Harry sat in the chair across from him, the same chair he'd occupied for 5 years of evening lessons, and looked at the envelope. It says a lot here about a school, not much about why. There are things I should tell you, Charles said. About how you came to live with your aunt and uncle, about what happened to your parents. He told him everything he knew, which was partial and gathered from sources that were themselves imperfect, the broad strokes of a wizarding war, a prophecy, a man named Voldemort, and parents who had died protecting him. He told him about the scar. He told him that the magical world thought of Harry Potter as a symbol, a legend, a child destined for something. Harry listened with the complete, uninterrupted attention he gave to everything important. When Charles finished, Harry was quiet for a moment. So Dumbledore left me with the Dursleys on purpose, he said. He believed it was necessary for protective reasons, magic he'd put in place. He left a 6-year-old with people he knew were unkind, Harry said, because it was strategically convenient. Charles held his gaze. Yes, Harry nodded slowly. This was the nod of someone filing information in a specific, carefully labeled place. And now he wants me at his school. The invitation is genuine. Hogwarts is real and by all accounts extraordinary. And your magical abilities, Charles paused. Harry, I believe that what we've never fully been able to categorize in your power is your magical core. I believe you carry both. And I believe Hogwarts could teach you things I cannot. Harry looked at him for a long moment, and Charles, for perhaps the first time with Harry, had the distinct sense of being fully, comprehensively read. You want me to go, Harry said. I want you to have every tool available to you, Charles said. That's different. Will you tell Jean? You should tell Jean. She's going to lose her mind. Almost certainly. Jean lost her mind, but in the contained, pacing around the kitchen way, that meant she was processing rather than objecting. She asked 12 questions in 4 minutes, half of which were practical and half of which were the kind that translated roughly to, but are you safe? But will you be okay? But do these people understand what they're getting? Harry answered the practical ones and let her work through the others. I don't like it, she said finally. I know. I don't like the part where some old wizard decided your childhood was acceptable collateral for his plans. I know. I really don't like the part where the magical world thinks you're there. She waved a hand, symbol. They're chosen things, like you don't get a vote. Jean, Harry said, I'm going to go, and I'm going to be fine. And if anyone tries to use me as a symbol, they're going to have a bad time. Jean looked at him. Then she pulled him into a hug that said several things she didn't feel like articulating, and Harry let her, because he understood them all anyway. He spent August preparing. Not packing, particularly. The list of supplies from Hogwarts was genuinely delightful. A fever dream of cauldrons and telescopes and books with titles like the Standard Book of Spells and Magical Drafts and Potions. But preparing in the way Charles had taught him. Knowing your terrain before you enter it, understanding the social and political landscape, going in with context. He read. He thought. He went to Diagon Alley with a glamour mild enough to be described as a very confident hat, and the awareness that his name was going to do something to every face that recognized it. He was right about this. It was instructive. He bought his books, his cauldron, his ingredients, his robes. He stood in Ollivander's for 32 minutes while wand after wand rejected him. Watched the old wand-maker's expression move from professional puzzlement through genuine curiosity to something approaching awe, and finally accepted a wand of 11 inches, holly wood, phoenix feather core, that jumped from its box and sent a cascade of red and gold sparks across the ceiling in a way that made Ollivander say softly, I wonder. In a tone that suggested he had several theories and was keeping them to himself. Harry took the wand. He felt it settle in his hand, felt it recognize something in him, and thought, hello. The wand, somehow, seemed to respond. He did not tell Charles about the wand's brother core. He looked it up himself, connected the thread, understood its implications, filed it in the same carefully labeled place as the information about Dumbledore, and continued packing. September 1st arrived the way important days do, with the mundane persistence of morning, which does not care what you're about to walk into. Harry took the train down with his trunk and a complete absence of anxiety, which he was aware was unusual for an 11-year-old entering a new school, but which felt entirely accurate. He'd been the new person before. He'd walked into rooms where he was already a story before he opened his mouth. The Xavier Institute on day one had been that, and he'd handled it by being, simply, himself, which had either impressed people or confused them, and both outcomes were fine. King's Cross was loud and bright and smelled of diesel and early September crowd. He found the barrier between platforms 9 and 10, with the specific confidence of someone who had read the relevant passage 3 times and memorized it, and walked through without hesitation, which meant he was already through and on platform 9 3/4, while a family of redheads behind him were still in a small pile of collapsed trolley. He stepped aside to give them room, then watched with genuine amusement as they untangled themselves. There were a lot of them. A mother who radiated a warmth that hit Harry like physical heat, twins who were already plotting something, a younger boy with a smudge on his nose looking mortified about the trolley, and a girl with serious eyes who had already picked up her trunk and was pretending the collision had happened to someone else. "Sorry about that," the younger boy said to Harry, though he hadn't caused the collision. It was just the kind of person he appeared to be. "Don't worry about it," Harry said, and meant it. He found a compartment, stowed his trunk, and settled in with one of his books, not a school book, a collection of advanced psionic theory that Logan had given him as a joke, because Logan thought academic texts were hilarious, and which Harry had read twice because he found the material genuinely interesting. The boy with the smudge on his nose knocked on the compartment door 20 minutes later. "Everywhere else is full," he said. "Can I sit?" "Sure." He dropped into the seat with the ease of someone who made friends the same way he breathed. "I'm Ron Weasley." "Harry Potter." Ron blinked. His eyes dropped to Harry's forehead, a reflex Harry had already noticed that wizarding-raised people seemed unable to control. The scar was there, visible above his fringe, lightning bolt-shaped and strangely silver in certain lights. "Oh," Ron said. Then, with the admirable honesty of someone who decided candor was easier than pretense, "That's wicked." Harry laughed. It was genuine. "Thanks." "So are you, do you remember?" Ron stopped himself. "Sorry, Mum says don't ask." "It's fine," Harry said. "I don't remember it. I was 1. He paused. "I know about it now, though. Long story." "Right." Ron nodded with the gravity of someone filing this away respectfully. Then, because he was fundamentally incapable of sustained seriousness. "Do you play chess?" They were 3 hours into the journey, deep into a chess game that Harry was losing with the specific equanimity of someone who found the loss analytically interesting rather than upsetting, when the compartment door opened again. The girl who'd stepped in was carrying a book open to the middle and reading as she walked, which Harry immediately respected. She had brown, curly hair, an air of focused purpose, and the expression of someone who had something specific on her mind. "Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one." She looked between them with quick, bright eyes. "You're playing chess." A beat. "You're Harry Potter." "He is," Ron said, with the tone of someone who had already processed this and moved on. "I'm Hermione Granger," she said, and stuck her hand out, which was the most straightforwardly normal thing anyone in the wizarding world had done to Harry all day, and he liked her immediately for it. "I've read a great deal about magical history, actually. You're in several books." "I'm aware," Harry said. "I haven't read them. I assume they're mostly wrong." Something in Hermione's expression shifted, a kind of recalibration. "They probably are," she said, sitting down with the practical ease of someone making a decision. "Most primary sources in magical historical accounts are heavily romanticized." She looked at the chessboard. "You're losing." "I know. Why aren't you?" She paused, looked at him more carefully. "You're not trying, are you?" "I'm learning," Harry said. "It's only useful to win once you understand why you're losing." Hermione stared at him for a moment, and Harry felt the precise texture of her reorientation, the way her initial category for him, famous boy, probably defined by his fame, was rapidly being overwritten by something more interesting. He didn't read her thoughts. He didn't need to. Her face did all of it. "I like that," she said finally, in the tone of someone giving a genuine compliment without any of the social softening. "Thanks." Ron looked between them and said, "Are you two going to be like this the whole year? Because I need to know now." "Probably," Harry said. "Absolutely," Hermione said. Ron groaned, moved his bishop, and said, "Checkmate, actually, your left flank." Harry looked at the board, found the mate, and laughed again, the second genuine laugh in one day, which was already a record for September. The sky outside the windows had gone from the blue of late afternoon to the deep purple of early northern evening when the train began to slow. They put their robes on. Harry's were new and fit correctly, which still felt faintly novel, and gathered their things, and the train pulled into a station that was less a station than a platform carved out of the dark, lit by lanterns and full of the noise of students and the smell of lake water. Furs years over here." The voice belonged to the largest man Harry had ever seen, which was a meaningful statement given that he had spent 3 years occasionally training, alongside individuals whose mutation expressed itself in substantial physical scale. This man was large in the natural, specifically human way, which somehow made it more impressive, a great warm wall of a person holding a lantern up against the dark. "Rubeus Hagrid," Hermione said quietly, from the notes she had apparently already made about Hogwarts staff. "Keeper of keys and grounds. He was a student here, expelled in his 3rd year, though the circumstances were disputed." "You researched the groundskeeper?" Ron asked. "I researched everyone." Harry followed the crowd down to the lake, where small boats sat waiting in a way that suggested magic had arranged them rather than any person, and stepped into one with Ron and Hermione, and a round-faced boy named Neville who had found his toad and was holding it with the anxious care of someone who had not entirely given up on losing it again. The boats moved on their own, and around the bend in the lake the castle revealed itself. Hogwarts was a thing that defied preparation. Harry had read descriptions. He had a reasonably good imagination, and a mind trained to model spatial environments. None of it had captured this, the castle rising out of the dark like something that had always been there and always would be, towers catching the moonlight, windows blazing warm gold, the whole mass of it lit from within as though it were alive rather than built. Harry was quiet for a moment. He felt it. That was the thing that surprised him, not how large it was or how beautiful, but how it felt from the inside. There was a deep, layered resonance to the place, the kind that his other sense, the one that Charles had never fully categorized, picked up as something between a smell and a sound. It was old. It was aware, in some way he couldn't articulate yet, and it recognized something in him, or he recognized something in it, and the awareness pulsed between them like the toll of a very large bell fading into silence. "Wow," Neville said. "Yeah," Harry agreed. The Great Hall was exactly as overwhelming as you'd expect from a room that had 4 long tables of students, a staff table full of adults trying to appear unsurprised by the existence of a floating ceiling, and several hundred candles that had apparently never met a light fixture. Harry filed in with the other first years, took stock of the room with the automatic tactical awareness that 5 years of Xavier Institute training had made involuntary, and noted the exits, the layout, the seating structure, and at the staff table, an old man with a very long silver beard, half-moon glasses, and the specific quality of settled stillness that meant he'd been watching the door since the first years started filing in. He was watching Harry. Not the way most people watched Harry, not with shock or awe or the weird reverence that wizarding-raised students were deploying. With the careful, considered attention of a man cataloging a gap between his expectations and his observations. Harry met his eyes calmly, held the contact for exactly long enough to establish that he'd noticed, and looked away. Albus Dumbledore, in his peripheral vision, adjusted his glasses. The sorting hat was placed on a stool at the front of the hall, and it opened a split along its brim and sang a song about the 4 Hogwarts houses that managed to be both informative and genuinely terrible poetry. Harry listened because ignoring information was a poor habit. Hermione, beside him, appeared to be committing it to memory. Ron appeared to be calculating his odds. The hat began calling names, and students went up one by one to have it placed on their heads, and Harry watched and catalogued while conversations happened around him. "Potter, Harry!" The hall, which had been maintaining its moderate ambient buzz, went quiet in the specific way of a room that had just heard something it had been waiting to hear. Harry walked to the stool without hurrying. He could feel the weight of several hundred attentions like physical pressure, which was not metaphorical for him. He was actively managing the passive broadcast that came with several hundred minds in close proximity, running the mental shielding Charles had drilled into him until it was reflex, keeping the noise down to a comfortable hum rather than a roar. He sat on the stool, and the hat was placed on his head. There was a moment of silence. Then, inside his head, not telepathically, not quite, but in some medium that occupied the overlap between magic and thought, the hat spoke. Well, now this is. A pause that felt like genuine surprise, which was a novel sensation from an enchanted object. "I've sorted a great many students, young man. I have not sorted anything quite like you." That's probably true, Harry thought back, because if the hat was going to have a conversation, he might as well participate. 2 kinds of fire in one vessel. The hat seemed to be talking to itself as much as to him. Scion and Mage, extraordinary range, extraordinary depth, and you're not afraid of yourself, that's rare. Most students your age with this kind of power are terrified of it. Fear doesn't help, Harry thought. Number it doesn't. Xavier taught you that. Harry was briefly surprised. Then wasn't, of course, an 1100-year-old enchanted artifact with access to his surface thoughts would have access to everything his surface thoughts contained, which included 5 years of training and the face of the man who'd carried him out of Surrey. He taught me a lot of things. I see that. The hat was quiet for a moment. Where to put you? You do well anywhere, do you know that? And I don't say that to every student. Bravery you have, not the reckless kind, the considered kind, which is better. Intelligence, well, your mind is a cathedral with the lights on. Loyalty is here too, yes, the deep kind. And ambition, not for power, for understanding. You want to know everything. You want to be capable of handling whatever comes. Is that Slytherin? Harry asked with mild amusement. It's human, the hat said. At your level of capability, the house distinctions start to look very small. But you asked, so I'll tell you where you will grow most. Where the history you're stepping into will find you best prepared. Where the people who need what you are will, yes, a beat. Gryffindor, the table on the left erupted. Red and gold, noise and motion. The twins from the platform standing on the bench shouting something about a Potter. Ron's face breaking into unguarded delight. And Harry set the hat down, stood, and walked to the Gryffindor table with the same unhurried pace he'd brought to the stool. He sat down, and the boy next to him immediately offered his hand, said his name was Seamus, and asked whether it was true he'd turned up in New York, which seemed to already be circulating as a rumor. "Yes," Harry said. "Brilliant," Seamus said, satisfied, and moved on. The feast appeared on the tables with the specific drama of magic that had been doing this for centuries, and was uninterested in building to it. And the hall became the noise and warmth of several hundred people eating good food in a room that was, despite itself, beginning to feel to Harry like something he recognized. Not home. Not yet. But familiar, in the way that anything built to house large numbers of people learning things they needed to learn had a common feeling. The Xavier Institute had it too. The sense of a place, organized around the premise, that the people inside it mattered. He ate and talked and listened, and across the hall he noticed Draco Malfoy, who'd been sorted into Slytherin with the smug certainty of someone for whom this was a foregone conclusion, watching him with the specific expression of someone recalibrating a plan. And at the staff table, Dumbledore was speaking quietly to a small, nervous-looking man in a turban who kept touching his head as though it hurt, And when Harry let his attention drift in that direction, unfocused, just tasting the surface, he caught something. Not from Dumbledore. From the man in the turban. It was very quiet. It was very deep. And it was not entirely alone. Harry returned his attention to his plate and his new housemates and the warm noise of the great hall, and filed this piece of information in the same careful, labeled place as everything else, and thought, interesting. He would look into that. He had time. Chapter 2. The sorting of stones. The dormitory was dark and smelled of old wood and something faintly herbal, and Harry lay in his four-poster bed listening to 5 other boys breathe their way into sleep and thought about the man in the turban. He wasn't panicking. Panic was the enemy of clarity, and clarity was the only tool that actually mattered in the dark. He ran the sensation back the way you'd replay a recording. That brief, unfocused brush of attention across the staff table, the texture of what he'd touched. The surface thoughts of most people had a quality to them, a kind of personal temperature. Dumbledore had been cool, organized, layered, a mind that had been managing itself for decades. The woman with the sharp face and emerald robes who turned out to be Professor McGonagall had been brisk and precise, thinking about logistics. Several others had the warm, slightly scattered texture of people, genuinely enjoying a good dinner. The man in the turban, Quirrell, someone had said his name was, Professor Quirrell, Defense Against the Dark Arts, had been wrong in a way Harry was still trying to articulate. Not wrong the way a lying mind felt wrong, which was a familiar dissonance, a thought running parallel to its own suppression. Wrong the way a room felt wrong when you walked in and realized someone else was already there, standing in the dark, breathing, like there were 2 temperatures in one body. Harry stared at the canopy of his bed and decided that he would verify this more carefully before drawing conclusions. Charles had been very clear about the difference between a hypothesis and a certainty, and the difference mattered enormously when what you were hypothesizing was that a man's mind might be occupied. He slept eventually, and dreamed of green light, and woke before the alarm with the practice of years. The castle in the early morning was a different thing entirely from the castle full of students. Harry walked the corridors before breakfast with his hands in his pockets and his senses running at low hum, getting the shape of the place. He'd done this at the Institute too, the first week, before anything else, just walking. You had to know the bones of somewhere before you could feel at home in it. Hogwarts had strange bones. Staircases that moved were obvious enough. He'd read about those. Less obvious was the ambient quality of the place, the way the walls seemed to have opinions about where you were going, the way certain corridors felt inhabited in a way that had nothing to do with ghosts, which he'd already catalogued as a separate category entirely. The magic in the stonework was old beyond any coherent origin point, layered over itself so many times it had stopped being a system and become something closer to an ecology. His other sense, the non-psionic one, the one Charles called the resonance, loved it here. It had been humming since the boat's last night with the pleased, alert quality of something that had found a compatible frequency. He found the library at 6:45 and made a note of its location, hours, and the fact that there was apparently a restricted section behind a velvet rope that required teachers' permission. He spent 7 minutes examining the rope and concluded it was a charm of moderate complexity and no serious deterrent. He went to breakfast instead. He was not going to start the first morning by breaking rules he didn't yet understand the purpose of. The great hall at early morning was sparse and golden and smelled of eggs and toast. Harry sat, ate, and watched the owls come in with mail, a cascade of them, all shapes and sizes, carrying parcels and letters and the occasional newspaper. Someone across the hall had a screech owl that landed in their porridge. This seemed like a design flaw in the system, but everyone appeared accustomed to it. A tawny owl he didn't recognize dropped a small parcel beside his plate, which he opened to find a note in Charles's handwriting. First day. I hope the castle is as remarkable as the accounts suggest. Jean sends her love, which she expressed by shouting it from the 3rd floor. Logan says, and I'm quoting directly, "Don't let anyone give you grief. I'm told this is affectionate. Write when you can. I want to know everything." Harry folded the note carefully and put it in his pocket and ate the rest of his eggs, and the warmth of it sat in his chest like a coal. The note settled something he hadn't realized was unsettled, which was the very particular anxiety of someone who had left the people they trusted in a place they couldn't see. He was going to be fine. He already knew this, but it was different to know it in an empty room at 4 a.m. versus to know it with a piece of paper that smelled like the Institute's stationery in your jacket pocket. Hermione arrived at the table 12 minutes later with her schedule already color-coded. She sat down, pushed a piece of toast toward him without being asked, some instinct about people who needed feeding that Harry filed as a good sign, and said, "Defense against the dark arts is 3rd period. I've already read the first 3 chapters of the textbook." "What did you think?" She paused. This was the pause of someone who'd been expecting to be asked if she'd done it, not what she'd thought of it. "I think the chapter on jinxes oversimplifies the wand movement theory," she said, "and the author has an annoying habit of conflating hexes and curses in a way that seems careless for an academic text." "So mediocre source material," Harry said. "Competent mediocrity," she amended, "which is almost worse." Ron appeared, slightly out of breath, at 7:45, dropped into the bench across from them and said, "Why are you both here so early? It's obscene." "I've been up since 5, Harry said. Ron stared at him. "That's genuinely troubling." Classes began. Transfiguration was McGonagall, and McGonagall was, in the precise language of assessment, excellent. She appeared in the classroom after they'd been waiting a few minutes as a cat sitting on her desk, shifted to herself without announcement, and informed them this was a foretaste of the subject's possibilities. The class had the satisfying quality of a teacher who had absolute command of their material and no patience for anything that wasted either her time or theirs. She set them to transfiguring matches into needles, which produced 11 variations on not quite a needle, Hermione getting the closest to a clean result by the end of class. Harry had looked at the match for approximately 90 seconds, felt for the magic in it, and it was there, accessible in the way that his resonance sense made magical objects accessible, as though things with latent enchantment had a handle on them, and produced a needle that was geometrically precise and entirely correct. He put it down before McGonagall finished her circuit of the room and picked the match back up and worked on making the process slightly imperfect, which took more concentration than doing it correctly, but seemed like the smarter approach for a first class at a school where standing out came with baggage he hadn't yet finished sorting. Then he reconsidered, because Charles had been very clear that hiding capability was a habit that corroded your relationship with your own power over time, and also he was 11 and this was a match. He transfigured the match into a needle, set it on his desk, and when McGonagall arrived and looked at it, her expression did the small, careful thing it did when something was not what she'd expected. "Excellent, Mr. Potter." She turned it over in her fingers. "Have you had prior instruction in transfiguration?" "Not in the magical variety," Harry said. McGonagall studied him for a moment with the same quality of attention Dumbledore had deployed last night, the recalibration, the gap between prediction and reality. "No," she said finally, in the tone of someone making a note. "I see." She moved on. Harry felt Hermione's attention from 2 seats over with the intensity of a searchlight and carefully did not look at her. Charms was Professor Flitwick, who was enthusiastic and tiny, and reminded Harry, with a warm shock of recognition, of Hank McCoy in the specific energy of a genuinely brilliant person who loved their field enough that it leaked out of them constantly. Flitwick had them beginning with simple levitation charms, Wingardium Leviosa, the swish and flick, and explained the interaction of wand motion and incantation with the pedagogical clarity of someone who had broken this down for first years so many times he'd refined it to its minimum necessary parts. Harry worked through it, adjusting for the fact that the wand was not his psionic ability, but an interface with the magical side of his power, more like a translator than a tool, something that helped the magic articulate itself into specific effects. Once he understood the relationship, the charm came naturally. The feather lifted on his second attempt, which he was genuinely satisfied with. Ron, 2 seats over, was on his 9th attempt. Harry watched him, identified the problem, wrist angle at the end of the motion, too sharp, breaking the flow of intent, and leaned over. "End of the swish," he said quietly. "Keep your wrist relaxed. It's not a snap, it's more like," he gestured, "a wave that decides to stop." Ron tried it. The feather lifted. Ron's expression was one of complete surprise. "How did you know that?" "I watched Flitwick's demonstration closely." "I watched it too." "You watched the wand," Harry said. "I watched his wrist." Ron looked at him with the evaluating squint of someone upgrading their assessment of a new acquaintance and said, "Right, you're going to be annoying, aren't you?" "Probably." "Great," Ron said, and levitated the feather again with visible satisfaction. Defense against the dark arts with Quirrell was 3rd period, and Harry went in with his shields properly calibrated, and his attention carefully split between appearing to be a normal student paying normal student attention and running the same unfocused surface scan he'd tried in the Great Hall, closer now and more controlled. Quirrell's class was, instructionally, not good. He was nervous in a way that communicated itself to the room, stumbling over his own material, losing his place in the text, jumping at a small sound when a bag fell from a desk. The turban wobbled when he turned his head quickly. The class of 31 11-year-olds sensed the vulnerability, the way groups always sense the vulnerability of whoever is supposed to be in charge of them, and the noise level rose in increments over the 45 minutes like a slow tide. Harry was not listening to the noise or the lecture. He was listening to the double frequency he'd clocked last night, closer now and clearer. There were definitely 2 temperatures in that room that belonged to Quirrell's body. The one on the surface, anxious, distracted, genuinely flustered, was Quirrell. The one beneath it was something else. Quiet, patient, contained with great and specific effort, like a banked fire in a room where everyone thought the fireplace was decorative. He did not push further. He had what he needed for the working hypothesis. He took his notes, thorough notes, because Quirrell's incompetence at teaching didn't mean the material wasn't worth knowing, and left with Ron and Hermione when the bell went. "He's terrible," Ron said in the corridor. "He's frightened," Hermione said. "Of what?" "I don't know," she frowned. "It seems excessive." For a teacher. Harry agreed with both of them, for different reasons, and said nothing about it yet. The days arranged themselves into a shape. Harry was good at finding shapes in new environments. It was a skill that had started as survival and developed into something closer to genuine curiosity about how systems worked. Hogwarts was a system of considerable complexity and very old momentum, and its shape was this. Classes and meals and the common room, the rhythms of the castle, the specific dynamics of the houses, the architecture of social structures among 140 students who had all come here carrying their own histories. He observed Draco Malfoy, who had made a comment on the train about the right sort with the practiced ease of someone repeating a lesson rather than forming an opinion, and was now watching Harry across the Great Hall with the expression of someone whose chess game had just changed. Malfoy was intelligent. Harry could see that without any particular ability, just attention. He was also running an identity that he hadn't fully grown into, the performance of a confidence that was 3 sizes too large and showed it at the seams. He would bear watching, but not with alarm. He observed the teachers more carefully than the students, because the teachers were where the real information was. McGonagall ran a tight room and graded without sentiment, and clearly had opinions about Dumbledore that she kept at the level of the bones rather than the surface, which was interesting. Snape was a puzzle box, a man running simultaneous contradictory programs, contemptuous and brilliant, and carrying something bitter that was old enough to have its own gravitational field. His first potions class was extraordinary. The lecture alone worth attending regardless of whether you were ever going to pick up a cauldron. And he pulled Harry aside at the end with a quality of attention that was half predatory and half, Harry thought, closer to genuine. "You're not what I expected, Potter," he said, which was apparently a thing everyone was going to say to Harry in their first week. "I get that a lot," Harry said. Snape's eyes narrowed, not angrily, analytically. "America," he said, not a question. 5 years. With whom?" Harry met his gaze. "People who taught me things that were useful." There was a long pause in which Snape appeared to be deciding whether to push further, and then decided not to in the way of someone who had recognized that this particular line of questioning might require more reciprocity than he was prepared for. "Your potion today," Snape said. "The heat regulation in your second stage was more sophisticated than the instructions required." "The instructions were conservative," Harry said. "The reaction reads clearer at 63 degrees than 60. Snape studied him for another moment. Then, "Don't develop the habit of ignoring written instructions in this classroom." "I didn't ignore them," Harry said. "I understood them well enough to work past them." Snape's expression did something quick and complex that might have been the ghost of being impressed. It was gone before he acknowledged it. "Go, don't be late to your next class." Harry went. He wrote to Charles that evening, 3 pages, which was either a lot or not enough depending on how you measured a week that had contained a sentient hat, a possibly occupied defense professor, and the growing sense that the castle itself was interested in him as a resident. He was sitting in the common room's window seat when Hermione appeared with the specific air of someone who had been working up to something. She sat across from him, arranged her own book, and then didn't open it. Harry waited. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. You knew the needle would come out right. I thought it probably would. You tested the match first. You held it for a minute before you did anything." She paused. "What were you doing?" Harry considered her. Hermione Granger had, in 1 week, demonstrated the following qualities: a memory that was essentially perfect, an analytical instinct that was so quick it read as intuition, but was actually just very fast pattern recognition, a directness that came from genuine confidence rather than social aggression, and the specific fearlessness about intellectual honesty that Harry had only encountered before in people like Charles, who had decided decades ago that truth was more interesting than comfort. She was, in short, someone he could be honest with. "Feeling for the magic in it," he said. She stared. "You could feel it, can't you?" She stopped. "I don't know, I've never thought about it that way, as something to feel." She looked at her own hands with the expression of someone who had just been told there was a door they hadn't tried. "What does it feel like?" "Like a handle," Harry said. "Like finding a grip." He paused. "For me it's easier because—" He stopped. "Because," she said, with the complete, focused attention of someone who genuinely wanted to know. "I have abilities that aren't magical," Harry said. "Different kind. They interact with the magic in a way that makes certain things more intuitive." He watched her process this. "I'm a mutant." The word landed in the conversation, and Hermione received it the way she received all information, with immediate, serious cognitive attention rather than any emotional reaction. "Like the X-Men," she said. "You know about them." "I grew up in the non-magical world. I've read the newspapers." She frowned. "What kind of mutant?" "Psionic, which means telepathy," and she paused. "You've been reading this common room," she said, not accusatory, just landing on it. "Passively," Harry said. "I keep shielding up. I don't read people intentionally without cause." "What's your cause threshold?" "Genuine danger or explicit invitation," Harry said. "Otherwise it's a violation, even if you can." She sat with this for a moment. "And you're a wizard as well." "Apparently. Does Dumbledore know?" "I'd assume so. He seems to know most things." Hermione's gaze went thoughtful in a way that meant she'd filed several things simultaneously and was already 3 moves ahead in the conversation. "What do you think of him?" "Early data," Harry said carefully. She looked at him with the particular directness that was becoming her signature move. "You don't trust him." "I have specific reasons for specific reservations." "He left you with your aunt and uncle." Harry met her eyes. "Yes." There was a beat of silence, and Hermione's expression was doing something careful and warm. She opened her book, but at an angle that meant she was still available for conversation, which was its own kind of thing. "I'm going to look up mutation theory in the library," she said. "The magical response to psionic ability, there must be literature on it." "There's very little," Harry said. "I checked." "I'll find something," she said with the absolute certainty of someone who had never failed to find something in a library. She was right, as it turned out. 3 days later, she produced a monograph from 1887 on convergent ability manifestation in individuals of dual lineage expression that was dense with academic hedging and poorly sourced, but contained 3 paragraphs that were genuinely interesting, which Harry read twice, and then sent to Charles, who responded via OWL 48 hours later with 4 pages of handwritten analysis, and the information that Hank was very excited about this and had started a new file. Ron entered the conversation about Harry's abilities laterally, the way Ron entered most things, sideways, empirically, without ceremony. They were in the common room, 11 days in, and Harry was doing something small with his telekinesis because he was thinking about something else and had absent-mindedly floated his quill from the table to his hand 3 times without using his fingers. Ron watched this for a moment and then said, "Right, so that's a thing." Harry looked at the quill. "Sorry." "No, don't be." Ron leaned forward with the genuine interest of someone who had grown up in a house full of magic and found a new kind of magic comprehensively fascinating rather than threatening. "Can you do more than that?" "Yes." "How much more?" Harry considered the common room. He gently, without any visible effort or change in expression, lifted every chess piece on Ron's abandoned board, arranged them in the opening configuration of the Queen's Gambit, set them down, and then looked at Ron. Ron's mouth was open. "Okay," he said. Yeah, okay." Then, "Does it ever backfire? Like Fred turned himself orange once, it was brilliant." "It doesn't really backfire," Harry said. "When it goes wrong, it's usually because I'm not paying attention, not because the ability itself misbehaves." "So you've got more control than an actual wand," Ron said. "Different kind of control," Harry said. "The wand is cleaner for magic. The psionic ability is cleaner for," he gestured vaguely at the chess pieces. "Can you read my mind right now? Number I'm not, but you could." "Yes." Ron thought about this with the visible seriousness he brought to anything that required genuine consideration, which turned out to be more things than his general demeanor implied. "Okay," he said. "As long as you don't go rummaging around in there without asking. There's stuff in there I'd prefer to keep private." "I won't," Harry said. "Right." Ron moved a chess piece. "Your move." On the 14th day, Dumbledore happened. It was happened rather than simply occurred, because the man had the gift of making encounters feel coincidental when they were absolutely not. And Harry was standing near the stone gargoyle on the 2nd floor during a free period, examining an interesting portrait that kept changing its background, when Dumbledore appeared from the staircase with the gentle, unhurried air of someone who had simply been passing by. "Ah, Harry," he said, admiring the portraits. "They're quite particular, the ones in this corridor. Mr. Bineswanger there hasn't changed his waistcoat in 3 centuries. The portrait looked offended. "I like his stubbornness," Harry said. Dumbledore smiled, warm and full, eyes twinkling behind the half-moon glasses. He had, Harry thought, an extraordinary gift for presence, the specific warmth of someone who made you feel like the most interesting person in whatever room you were sharing. He understood what the gift was for, which was the thing that kept him from being simply charmed by it. "I was hoping we might have a chance to speak," Dumbledore said. "You've had a rather extraordinary start. Your teachers speak very highly of you." "They're good teachers," Harry said. "Mostly." Dumbledore's eyes moved briefly to the corridor in the direction of the defense classroom. "Quite." He clasped his hands. "I wanted to offer you my door, as it were. I imagine adjusting to the magical world raises questions. The story of who you are, of your parents, of what happened, is not a small story to carry." "No," Harry agreed. "You must have many questions." "Some." Dumbledore waited with the skilled patience of a man who understood that silence was the most effective invitation. Harry looked at him with the calm, open expression he used when he was being genuinely attentive and giving nothing else, and waited with equal patience, and the silence stretched between them like a rope both of them were holding from opposite ends. "Professor Xavier has done a remarkable job," Dumbledore said finally, and there was something in the way he said it, careful, slightly weighted, that Harry catalogued. "He has," Harry said. "A gifted man, extraordinary abilities." A pause. "Different world, of course. The concerns there, the relationship between mutants and the non-mutant population, quite different from what faces you here." "Are they?" Harry said. A slight adjustment in Dumbledore's expression, almost undetectable. "The threat that ended your parents' lives is not gone, Harry. Not fully. You carry," he paused, and Harry felt the quality of his attention sharpen fractionally, "a significance that goes beyond your personal story. There are people who will look to you, who already do." "I know," Harry said. "I've read the books." "Ah," Dumbledore smiled. "You'll find the books rather incomplete," Harry said, "and heavily editorialized, yes." He met the old man's eyes directly. "Professor Dumbledore, I appreciate you making time for this conversation. I want to be honest with you. I know that you placed me with the Dursleys. I know it was a considered decision. I don't hold it against you. The slight emphasis here was precise and intentional, but I wanted you to know that I know, so we can skip the part where we don't mention it." The corridor was very quiet. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a moment with something behind his eyes that was hard to name, not quite shock, not quite admiration, something that occupied the space between them. "Xavier told you," he said. "He told me what he knew," Harry said. "I drew conclusions." "You're very direct." "I find it saves time." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, and in that moment something in his posture shifted, something infinitesimal, like a gear settling into a new position. The warmth was still there, but the performance of warmth had stepped back a little, and what was underneath was more interesting, older, more complex, more genuinely weary. "You're not what I expected, Harry," he said, and this time the phrase had a different weight than it had carried from everyone else. "I know," Harry said. "I'm sorry if that's inconvenient." "It's not inconvenient," Dumbledore said with what sounded, for the first time, like a genuine reply rather than a managed one. "It's—" the pause that felt like the old man genuinely searching for a word, clarifying. He looked at Harry for another moment, and Harry met his eyes steadily, and neither of them felt the need to fill the air with anything else. "My door is open," Dumbledore said finally. "Whatever questions you have." "Thank you," Harry said. "I'll take you up on that." Dumbledore left. Harry watched him go and then looked back at the portrait, where Bineswanger had in fact changed into a very slightly different waistcoat, which the portrait seemed unaware of. The chess match between them, Harry thought, had just officially started. The pieces were on the board. The openings had been made. Dumbledore was extraordinarily good at this game, and had been playing it for longer than most people had been alive. Harry was 11 years old, had been trained by Charles Xavier, and found chess instructive. He was not worried. He went to the library. The library was where Hermione had established what she called a study schedule, and Ron called a mutual academic hostage situation, and Harry called privately the best part of his week. They had fallen into a rhythm of meeting there 4 afternoons out of 7, which was enough to be a pattern without being a constraint. And in the pattern, Harry found the specific comfort of people who expected you to show up and were genuinely pleased when you did. Today Hermione had 4 books open, and was comparing passages with the focused intensity of someone untangling a knot. Ron was nominally doing his transfiguration homework and actually drawing elaborate diagrams of a chess strategy in the margins. Harry sat, opened his charms textbook, and immediately found something in the footnotes more interesting than the main text, which was a recurring problem. "Harry," Hermione said without looking up. "Have you been near the 3rd floor yet?" Ron looked up. "The corridor," Harry said. "The one Dumbledore said is out of bounds at the welcome feast." She finally looked up. "I find the specificity strange, not just certain areas or the restricted floors, a specific corridor on a specific floor, and the phrasing a most painful death. That's not a usual deterrent." It's probably just something dangerous, Ron said. Most dangerous things in a school are in the forbidden forest or the restricted section, Hermione said. They don't get named publicly as singular locations. What are you thinking? Harry asked. I think something is being stored there, she said. Something important enough that it required a public announcement, which means the announcement itself is also a communication, to someone. Harry looked at her with the quality of attention he reserved for things that were unexpected and good. Who would the announcement be for? Hermione held his gaze. Someone who might try to access it, someone who already knew it was there. She paused. Or someone who needs to be reminded that other people know. Ron looked between them. Okay, the two of you are actually quite alarming. I've been past the door, Harry said. They both stared. I did a full walk of the castle in the first 3 days, Harry said. It's warded, multiple layers, some of them quite old, and at least 2 that are more recent. There's also a dog. A dog, Ron said. Very large, 3 heads. Ron set down his quill. Of course. I didn't go in, Harry said. I just looked. He paused. It's guarding something. The wards on the room below the trapdoor are much denser than you'd use for an ordinary dangerous animal containment. Whatever's under the dog is meant to be kept there seriously. He paused again. There's one ward down there that I've only seen Charles use around things he considers genuinely dangerous. Something made to resist someone with significant ability trying to push through it. Hermione's eyes were bright with the particular illumination of someone fitting pieces together. So whatever it is matters enough to warrant those protections. And matters enough to involve Dumbledore directly, yes. The Gringotts break-in, Hermione said immediately. In the summer. It was in the papers, a break-in at Gringotts. A vault was found to have been emptied already. The vault had been emptied the same day someone tried to break into it. She'd folded the information into the conversation with the ease of someone who had been waiting for the right moment to deploy it. Something was moved before anyone could steal it. Harry nodded slowly. And moved here. Ron looked at the ceiling. So underneath a 3-headed dog in the forbidden corridor there is something someone wanted badly enough to attempt robbing the most secure bank in the wizarding world. That's the hypothesis, Hermione said. And it's in our school, Ron said. Brilliant, that's completely brilliant. I'm not going to go looking for it, Harry said. Not yet. We don't have enough information, and the wards are serious enough that going in would be. I'd have to break some of them, which would alert Dumbledore. I don't want to announce anything I'm not ready to announce. He paused. But I want to keep tracking. Obviously, Hermione and Ron said simultaneously, and then looked at each other with the mutual surprise of people who had each assumed the other was more cautious. Right, Ron said. So we're doing this. We're gathering information, Harry said. That's all. That's how all the stories start, Ron said cheerfully and went back to his chess diagrams. In the corridor outside the library, which none of them saw, Peeves the poltergeist had materialized briefly to eavesdrop, and then drifted away looking, for the first time in 300 years, faintly concerned. 2 weeks in, the first direct confrontation happened, and it was both smaller and larger than Harry had expected. It was a Thursday, the corridor outside the Charms classroom, the usual after-class dispersal of bodies and noise. Draco Malfoy had been working up to something for a week. Harry had felt it in the way you feel weather changing, the slow accumulation of intention, and he finally arrived at it in a cluster of 3 Slytherins and the specific register of a performance. Loud enough to have an audience, specific enough to have a target. Been meaning to ask, Potter, Malfoy said. His voice had the carrying quality of someone who'd been told since childhood that rooms were his to command. Where exactly did you come from? The stories are, well, some of them are embarrassing. Which ones? Harry said. Malfoy blinked. He'd expected a reaction, defensiveness, discomfort, the general squirm of someone who didn't want their business aired. He'd spent 12 years being the person who made other people squirm. Hiding in America, Malfoy said, recovering. Raised by, what muggles? Worse than muggles, I heard. Freaks. Mutants, Harry said pleasantly. That's the word, and yes. Another blink. This kept happening, Malfoy aiming at something and finding Harry already standing 6 inches to the left. "You don't seem bothered by that," Malfoy said. "Why would I be?" "You're kind, the mutant." He said the word with the deliberate emphasis of a person who had learned contempt as a vocabulary. "They're an embarrassment even to the Muggle world. Freaks of nature. At least half-bloods have." The charms on the nearby notice board tightened, a tiny involuntary response barely visible. Harry's expression didn't change. "Draco," Harry said, and the use of his first name brought Malfoy up short, because it implied both familiarity and a very specific kind of dismissal. "I understand what you're doing and I don't mind it, but let me be honest with you." His voice was even, not cold, conversational. "What you just said about mutants is exactly what the people who hate wizards say about you. Word for word, different noun, you probably know that already." Malfoy's jaw tightened. "You're not stupid," Harry said. "That's also true, and you're going to figure out in the next year or two that a lot of what you were taught is," he paused, "not wrong exactly. Just much smaller than the world it was supposed to explain." He picked up his bag. "The offer to start over stands whenever you want it." He walked away, with Ron and Hermione at his shoulders, and Malfoy stood in the corridor with the expression of someone who had been handed something they hadn't decided what to do with. Behind them, in the corridor, Crabbe said, "Was that good or bad?" And Malfoy said nothing, which meant he didn't know yet. Harry walked back to the common room with the autumn light coming through the corridor windows in long amber bars, and felt Hermione's amusement from 2 feet to his left without looking at her. "You know that'll make him more irritating for a while before it makes him less," she said. "Probably," Harry said. "Worth it." Harry thought about Malfoy's face when a real idea had hit it, the involuntary thing, the actual response underneath the performance. "Yeah," he said. "I think so." He fell asleep that night to the sound of the castle breathing, because that was really what it felt like, a deep, slow rhythm in the stone, old and ongoing, and his last thought before he went under was that this strange, enormous place was becoming, incrementally and undeniably, somewhere he belonged. He had not expected to feel this so quickly. He was, on reflection, glad about it. Chapter 3. The shape of things beneath October arrived like someone had replaced the scenery overnight. The castle went amber and copper at the edges. The lake turned from blue-gray to a deep steel mirror, and the grounds smelled of wet leaves and the particular cold that meant winter was not far behind but was still deciding on its entrance. Harry liked it. He had spent autumns at the Xavier Institute watching the New York forests change color through the training room windows, and autumn had always felt like the season most honest about the nature of things, everything showing its true colors right before it went away. He was standing on the edge of the Quidditch pitch at 7 in the morning when Oliver Wood found him. Wood was the Gryffindor Quidditch captain, a 6th year with the specific single-mindedness of someone who had organized his entire personality around one thing and found it adequate. He had apparently been looking for Harry since the previous week, when McGonagall had, as Harry had discovered second-hand through Neville, who'd heard it from Percy, who'd heard it from Oliver himself, quietly suggested that Harry might be worth watching on a broomstick. Potter, Wood said, arriving at the pitch with the energy of someone who'd been awake for several hours and considered this normal. "Have you flown before?" "No," Harry said. Wood's face did something complicated. Would you be willing to try? Right now?" Harry looked at the row of school brooms in the equipment shed. He'd read about flying, the theory of it, the interaction between the broom's enchantments and the writer's magical focus. He'd been curious about it in the way he was curious about most things that combined physical action with magical interaction. "Yes," he said. He was in the air for approximately 90 seconds before Wood shouted something from the ground that Harry couldn't quite hear because the wind had taken it, and then he stopped caring about what Wood was shouting because the flying was. It was extraordinary, actually. It was nothing like the descriptions. Descriptions talked about speed, about height, about the vertigo of it, and those were all true, but they weren't the thing. The thing was that up here, moving at speed through cold October air with the castle dropping away below and the sky opening up above. Every sense he had was engaged simultaneously. The wind, the physical sensation of the broom under him, responsive to the faintest shift of weight or intention. The way the magical resonance of the enchanted wood synced with his own frequency in a way that made the broom feel less like a vehicle and more like an extension. He banked left without thinking about it, dropped into a dive for 3 seconds, pulled out clean, and rose again. Below, Wood had stopped shouting and was just watching. Harry spent 20 minutes on the broom by himself, working it out. He was not flashy about it. He found the edges of what the school broom could do, which were considerable but finite, and he worked within them, learning the specific language of it. When he landed, Wood looked at him with the expression of someone who had just received a gift they hadn't expected. "You've really never flown before," Wood said. "Never. You're a natural." He paused. "You're more than a natural, I don't." He stopped himself from entering rhapsody and returned to practicality. "I want you on the team. Seeker. Our old Seeker graduated last year. Would you play?" "Tell me about the position," Harry said. Wood told him about the position for 11 minutes, which was the version edited for the sake of time. Harry asked 4 questions: the dimensions of the snitch, the scoring system, the interaction between Seeker and Chaser strategy, and whether the Seeker's role was primarily reactive or could be shaped proactively. Wood answered the first 2 confidently, and the second 2 with the growing expression of someone who had never been asked those particular questions. "I'll play," Harry said. He told Ron at breakfast, and Ron behaved as though Harry had personally given him a present, his face cycling through delight and territorial satisfaction, and the specific pride of someone who had made a good friend before the friend became famous for an additional thing. "Youngest Seeker in a century," he said, because news in Hogwarts traveled roughly at the speed of Oliver Wood's enthusiasm. "Fred and George are absolutely losing their minds. They seem fine. That's how you know they're not fine. When they're fine, they talk constantly." Ron loaded his plate. "Hermione's going to pretend she's not excited and then research the entire history of the position." "I know," Harry said. "She already has," Ron said. "She found me this morning at 6:30 with a book." Hermione arrived at the table 3 minutes later, sat down, and said, "The youngest Seeker in a century was Luca Delacroix in 1896, who notably had documented precognitive ability which clearly aided his performance." She set the book down with the specific energy of someone making a point. "I'm not saying you have precognition." "I don't have precognition," Harry said. "No, but you have exceptional spatial awareness, kinesthetic intelligence above the standard range, and," she lowered her voice, "a spatial sense that doesn't require visual confirmation, which is arguably better." Harry looked at her. "You've been building a case for why my abilities make this not technically unfair." "I've been building a case for why your abilities make this interesting," she corrected. "There's a difference." He had his first practice with the full team that Saturday, which went well by every metric. The Weasley twins treated him with the immediate casual warmth of people who had already decided he was theirs, which was disarming, and also the easiest social welcome he'd received from anyone outside the Institute. They flew in coordinated chaos that somehow always resolved before collision. They explained the nuances of bludger behavior with the enthusiasm of people who genuinely love the element of physical danger, and they spent 40 minutes deliberately trying to knock Harry off his broom with practice bludgers, which he avoided with the ease of someone who'd trained with Logan. "He's not even turning his head," George said. "He hears them coming," Fred said. "That's not how ears work," George said. "His might be," Fred said. Both of them looked at Harry with the expression of people revising their understanding upward, which was an expression he was becoming familiar with. Quirrell got worse in October. This was the only way Harry could describe it, the man deteriorating in real time, the anxiety on the surface sharpening toward something like pain, and the thing beneath it becoming simultaneously quieter and more intense, the way a flame gets more concentrated as it runs out of room. Harry was in every defense class watching it, and was now clear enough in his hypothesis that it had upgraded from hypothesis to working theory. There was something inside Quirrell. It was intelligent and old and patient, and it was using Quirrell the way you used a vehicle, without particular care for the vehicle's well-being. The symptoms of it were visible once you knew what you were looking at. The way Quirrell sometimes stopped mid-sentence as though receiving instruction. The way his hands shook not with nervousness, but with the specific tremor of suppression. The fact that when Harry had let himself brush the surface of that room twice more since the first time, the foreign presence was clearer each time, like something adjusting its volume. He had not told anyone. Not Ron, not Hermione, not Dumbledore. He was working through his reasons carefully. Ron and Hermione were 11, and the information carried a specific danger he wasn't ready to place in their vicinity without more certainty, and a plan attached to it. Dumbledore, he was fairly certain Dumbledore knew something. The particular blindness that powerful people could develop when they needed things to be a certain way, when they had decided the shape of events in advance. Or, more ungenerous possibility, Dumbledore knew and was allowing it, for the reason that whatever was in the third-floor corridor needed testing, and having the thing in Quirrell close to it was a part of the test. Harry was not inclined toward the ungenerous possibility, but he kept it filed. He wrote to Charles in his second week of October, not explaining everything but explaining enough. The reply came quickly, 2 days rather than the usual 4, and it was shorter than Charles's letters usually were. Trust your instincts and your training. Do not engage anything of that magnitude alone until you have clearer information. That instruction applies regardless of how capable you are, Harry. Capability is not the same as having enough information to act wisely. Jean is watching the news from London. She has opinions. I have asked her to let you have the experience. She is finding this difficult. See, Harry wrote back, tell her I'll call on the weekend. Also tell her I've joined the Quidditch team. The reply to this took 6 hours and arrived in the middle of History of Magic, which was the one class Harry had not found a way to make interesting because Professor Binns was a ghost who had died at his desk, and apparently not noticed, and delivered his lectures in the specific monotone of someone who had understood centuries ago that the content was less important than the passage of time. The reply said, she screamed. Logan came to ask what happened. He has questions about this broomstick sport, and I believe he finds it respectable in a way he hasn't decided how to express yet. Harry tucked the letter away and smiled at his desk for a full minute, which Hermione noticed and filed away, and Ron noticed and decided not to comment on because some things were private. The troll happened on Halloween. Halloween at Hogwarts was the kind of occasion that suggested the decorators had been given unlimited budget and the instruction to commit completely. Live bats, extraordinary food, candles everywhere, and the specific atmosphere of a castle that had been celebrating this particular holiday for 1,000 years and had strong feelings about doing it right. The great hall smelled of pumpkin and something spiced, and Harry sat between Ron and the twins and thought that if you could bottle the texture of October in a building like this, you'd have something genuinely worth keeping. The troll walked into the corridor outside at 9:42, which Harry was aware of before anyone announced it, because at 9:39 he'd felt a disturbance on the second floor. Something large, confused, and aggressively not magical moving through a space that was full of very old magic, and had been tracking it passively while appearing to eat his dessert. He knew exactly what it was because he'd encountered the concept in preparation for Hogwarts, and the mental signature matched: large, blunt, single-frequency emotional broadcast, driven by a combination of hunger and territorial confusion. He felt it navigate the second-floor corridor, then the staircase, then the first floor. At 9:42, Quirrell burst into the great hall with his turban askew and shouted, "Troll! In the dungeon! Thought you ought to know," and then fainted. The hall erupted. Dumbledore restored order in under 30 seconds, which was genuinely impressive, and dispatched teachers and organized houses for dormitories with the practiced efficiency of someone who had managed emergencies in this building for decades. Harry was moving for the corridor before the Gryffindor prefect had finished saying, "Follow me, single file." Ron grabbed his arm. "Where are you going?" "Second floor girls' bathroom," Harry said. "Hermione." Ron understood immediately. Hermione had been crying in the bathroom all afternoon because Ron had said her know-it-all tendencies were annoying, which Harry had informed him was both unkind and inaccurate, and which Ron had been feeling bad about since 3 o'clock without having worked out how to say so. "Right," Ron said, and followed without hesitation. They went up the back staircase that Harry knew because he knew all the staircases, and the troll was exactly where he'd tracked it to, lumbering in the second-floor corridor, 12 feet of muscle and stench, having just knocked a suit of armor off the wall for reasons that were apparently recreational. Hermione was in the bathroom doorway ahead of it, frozen in the specific way of someone who had turned a corner and found something that shorted out their planning instinct. The troll turned toward her. Harry stepped into the corridor between them. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds. Later, Ron would try to describe it to the twins and find that the description kept compressing. It had been very fast and very clear, and afterward, the troll was lying sideways against the wall with no apparent injury, entirely unconscious. And it was difficult to explain the in-between. What had actually happened was this. Harry had reached out with his telekinesis, found the troll's center of mass, enormous, but mass was mass, and turned its momentum smoothly sideways, redirecting a forward lunge into a sideways sprawl. The troll's own weight had done the rest, carrying it into the wall at enough velocity to crack the stonework slightly and render it unconscious through impact. Harry had not moved. He'd been standing in the corridor with his hands at his sides and his expression calm, and the troll had gone sideways without being touched. Hermione was staring at him. Ron was staring at him. "Are you all right?" Harry asked Hermione. She closed her mouth, opened it. "Yes," she said. Yes. How did you?" "I'll explain later," Harry said. "We should be in Gryffindor Tower." They were not, of course, in Gryffindor Tower, which meant they were standing next to a large unconscious troll in a damaged corridor when McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell arrived. McGonagall's expression went through 4 stages in approximately 2 seconds. The stage Harry found most informative was the third one, which came after shock and before the professional restoration of composure, the moment where she looked at the troll, at the wall, at the 3 of them, and at Harry in particular, and understood both what had happened and that she did not have a category prepared for it. "Explain," she said. "Hermione was in the bathroom when the troll came down the corridor," Ron said, with the instinctive firstness of someone covering for a friend. "Harry and I realized she wouldn't know. We came to warn her." McGonagall looked at Ron, then at Harry. "And the troll? I persuaded it to stop," Harry said. Snape was looking at the wall, at the crack where the troll's head had met stone, at the angle of the body. He said nothing, but his eyes moved to Harry with the familiar analytical quality and stayed there a beat longer than necessary. McGonagall took 5 points from Gryffindor for being out of place and gave 5 back for presence of mind, which seemed to her like the only structurally coherent response to a situation for which the usual script wasn't applicable. She sent them to their dormitory. In the corridor behind them, Harry heard her voice drop lower, speaking to Snape, and he did not listen further because it wasn't relevant yet. In the common room, Hermione sat across from him with a cup of tea that the house elves had sent up, apparently a regular offering on high-stress evenings, and said, "You could have done that from further away, couldn't you?" It wasn't a question. "Yes," Harry said. "You waited until it was close enough that it would look accidental, like the troll lost its footing." "Old habit," Harry said. "From the Institute, new environment, don't show your ceiling first." Hermione looked at him steadily. "I don't want you to do that for my sake. Hide what you can do so I'm not made uncomfortable or impressed. That's not why I did it." "Then why?" Harry was quiet for a moment. "There's something in this school that I'm still figuring out the shape of. Until I know what it wants, what it's tracking, I'd rather it not know my ceiling either." He paused. "That's more honest." Hermione held his gaze. Then she nodded in the way of someone making a specific decision about trust. All right, but you tell us when you figure out the shape of it. I will, Ron, who had been sitting in the third armchair, said. For what it's worth, I thought it was excellent. The bit where he made a gesture indicating sideways trajectory at velocity, was brilliant. Thank you, Harry said. Also, I'm sorry, Ron said to Hermione, because he'd been building to it since 3 o'clock. Hermione looked at him. You were unkind. I know, but fairly accurate, she said, with the specific grace of someone who had processed hurt and come out the other side of it with honesty and tact. I can be a know-it-all. In a good way, mostly, Ron said. In all ways, Harry said. Both parts of it. Hermione looked at both of them, and something in her expression settled, the way a foundation settles, solid and load-bearing. This was the moment, Harry thought, in the specific way he sometimes knew the hinge moments. This was when the three of them became something more than coincidentally shared, when the word friends stopped being descriptive and became structural. We should go to sleep, Hermione said. Yes, Harry agreed. Tomorrow, Ron said. I want to hear more about the not showing your ceiling thing. That sounds like a strategy conversation, and I like those. He went asleep that night with the warmth of it still in his chest, that specific warmth of people who had decided you were worth keeping and didn't dream of green light at all. Snape found him on a Tuesday in early November, not in class, in the corridor outside the library late afternoon, which meant the corridor was nearly empty and the encounter had been arranged rather than accidental, which Harry registered and filed. Walk with me, Snape said. They walked. The castle in the long late afternoon light did its atmospheric best, which was extraordinary, and Snape was quiet for long enough that Harry understood he was organizing something. I want to ask you something, Snape said finally. And I would like a straight answer, which I suspect, given what I know of you so far, is something you are capable of providing. Ask, Harry said. Quirrell, Snape said. Harry was quiet. You've noticed something, Snape said. Not a question. What makes you think that? Because I've noticed something, Snape said, and I am the best at not noticing things when I choose not to. If I've noticed something that I can't suppress, then someone with your particular capabilities would have noticed it far earlier and with considerably more clarity. Harry looked at him. Snape was running multiple things simultaneously. Harry could feel the complexity of it without reading it, the specific gravitational field of a mind that was used to carrying contradictory truths in separate rooms. But the question was genuine. The concern beneath it was genuine. This was not, Harry thought, a man who was neutral about what was happening with Quirrell. There are 2 things in that room, Harry said. One of them is Quirrell, the other is something old that's using Quirrell as a container. It's getting stronger. Snape was very still. You're certain? As certain as my abilities allow me to be without direct and invasive examination, which I haven't done. Why not? Because I don't know the full situation yet, Harry said. And because a direct, psionic examination of something of that magnitude, something powerful enough to possess a person and sustain it for what looks like months, carries risk for both parties. I won't do it without more preparation. Snape looked at him with an expression that was doing several things at once. You're being careful, he said, and it sounded faintly like it surprised him. Charles taught me that capability and wisdom aren't the same thing, Harry said. You can be very powerful and very stupid. He spent a lot of time making sure I understood the difference. A long silence in the corridor. Quirrell is going to try to access what's in the 3rd-floor corridor, Snape said, and the flatness of it meant this was something he'd already known rather than suspected. I know, Harry said. Snape stopped. There was something in the stop, a careful management. I've been watching it, attempting to intercede in manageable ways, monitoring the protections on that corridor. He paused. I don't know that what's there is sufficient. It's not, Harry said. Snape looked at him. I've examined the wards from outside, Harry said. Multiple layers, all well constructed. But the thing inside Quirrell, if it gets free of enough of his limitations, I don't think the protections are designed for something of that power level. They're designed to stop a person. And the thing inside Quirrell, Snape said slowly, is not a person. It's the remnant of one, Harry said. It's not whole, but it's concentrated. He paused. Snape, what is it? What's down there? Snape studied him for a long moment. The calculation in his expression was clear and complex, how much to say, what the consequences were of each option, what this particular boy could be trusted with. A philosopher's stone, Snape said. The only one. It produces the elixir of life. The thing inside Quirrell would very much like it for reasons I assume you can deduce. Harry deduced them. The full weight of it landed and organized itself in his understanding. Voldemort, because it was Voldemort, it had always been Voldemort. The residual presence he'd touched in that room had the specific signature of something that had chosen to endure instead of ending. Voldemort, bodiless and diminished, clinging to Quirrell and driving him toward a stone that could rebuild him fully. How long? Harry asked. Before he makes his attempt, Snape said. I don't know. I've been buying time. There's a harp. The dog responds to music. I've been ensuring it plays. A pause that cost him something to make. I can't be there continuously, and when the attempt comes, if Quirrell gets past the protections. He won't, Harry said. Snape looked at him. Potter, he won't, Harry said again, and there was nothing theatrical about it, no performance of confidence. It was simply the statement of someone who had run the calculation and arrived at a conclusion. Snape was quiet for a moment. Something in his expression was difficult to read, and Harry let it be difficult. Some things were not his to fully see. Dumbledore is, Snape started. Managing it in his own way, Harry said. I know. He paused. I'm not going to interfere with whatever he has planned. I'm going to be prepared for what happens if his plan isn't sufficient. And if I asked you to tell him about this conversation, Snape said. Harry thought about it genuinely. Would you like me to? Snape considered. Not yet, he said. I would like to know first what you plan to do. I plan to keep watching, Harry said, and to be ready. Snape looked at him with the expression he always wore when Harry said something that landed outside the space he'd prepared for it. Then he said, very dryly, with just the ghost of something warmer beneath it, Xavier trained you well. I keep hearing that, Harry said, perhaps because it keeps being true. Snape turned back in the direction of the dungeons. Potter, he paused without turning. Be careful with what you can see. Not all of it should be acted on immediately. I know, Harry said. Snape walked away. Harry watched him go and thought about the specific geometry of a man who had clearly decided to be on the right side of something and found the process immensely costly, and felt something that wasn't quite sympathy but was adjacent to respect. He went to the library. He wrote 2 letters that night, one to Charles, more detailed than any he'd sent before, laying out the full picture. Quirrell, Voldemort, the stone, Snape, and his own assessment of the timetable. He did not ask for permission or assistance. He gave Charles the information because Charles deserved to have it, and because the act of writing it out clearly helped Harry think. The second letter was shorter, addressed to Jean. I'm fine. The school is good. I've made friends, real ones. The situation here is more complicated than it looked from the outside, but nothing I can't navigate. I will call Sunday. Tell Logan I caught a snitch in under 3 minutes at practice yesterday. He'll either respect this or start asking questions about whether Quidditch constitutes a valid combat sport. Either outcome is fine with me. He sealed both, gave them to the school owls, and went to bed. The response from Charles came Thursday, and it was thoughtful and measured, and at its heart said, I trust your judgment. Do not act alone if you can help it. I am here if you need me. The response from Jean came Friday, and it said, Logan says Quidditch sounds ridiculous and also respectable, and he wants a full explanation of the bludger system and why no one has been killed yet. I told him statistically some people have. He said, good sport then. I love him, but he's insane. I love you. Be safe. Call Sunday. Harry was smiling when he folded it. The Quidditch match against Slytherin was on the 12th of November, a pewter-gray Saturday with a wind that had decided to make itself a player. Harry had been in the air long enough to feel the weather as a variable rather than a setting. The wind had a pattern to it, a northeast rotation that shifted at roughly 4-second intervals, and he mapped it in the first 5 minutes of play and adjusted. The match was fast and physical and full of the specific noise that hundreds of people watching something that mattered made. A sound that Harry found interesting the first time he heard it. A kind of collective emotional broadcast that he could feel at the edges even without opening his shields at all. He found the snitch at the 17-minute mark. It was hovering in the wind shadow of one of the Slytherin goalposts, which was smart positioning for a small gold ball. The turbulence there made visual tracking difficult and meant most seekers would overshoot. Harry was tracking it kinesthetically as much as visually, feeling the tiny displacement in the air from its wings, and had been aware of its general position for 4 minutes before the visual confirmation. He went for it straight, not the gradually accelerating stalk of classic Seeker approach, but a direct committed line, because the Slytherin Seeker was already reacting, and direct was faster than clever at this range. He caught it clean, 8 feet off the ground, hand closing around warm metal and frantic tiny wings. The noise the crowd made was a physical thing. Gryffindor, 180-20. In the changing rooms afterward, the team was luminous with it, the specific joy of people who had won something together, which Harry had felt before in training at the Institute, but not quite like this, not with this particular flavor of shared effort and shared outcome. He was pulled into the celebration without resistance, which was less usual for him than it appeared, and found that he was genuinely happy. It was a simple feeling. He held it carefully. That evening, the 3 of them sat in the common room with hot chocolate that someone's mum had sent, Ron's, presumably, because the biscuits that accompanied it were homemade in a way that suggested someone who thought food was an act of love, and Harry said, "I want to tell you both what I know about Quirrell." They looked at him. He had their full attention instantly, the way people gave full attention when they'd been waiting for a door to open. He told them. Not everything, not the letter from Charles, not the conversation with Snape, but the core of it. What he'd sensed, what he believed, what Voldemort's presence in Quirrell meant for the thing in the 3rd-floor corridor. When he finished, the common room was quiet except for the fire. Ron said, "Voldemort, he who must not be named, isn't our defense teacher." "Part of him," Harry said. "A remnant." "That's somehow worse," Ron said. "A whole Voldemort seems more manageable than a bit of Voldemort that's willing to wear people." Hermione had been very still throughout. Now she said, "You've known this for weeks." "I've had a working theory for weeks," Harry said. "I wanted to be more certain before I brought it to either of you." "Because we're younger," Hermione started. "Because it carries danger and I wanted to understand the shape of it first," Harry said. "Not because I don't trust you. Because I didn't want to give you something I didn't yet have enough information to explain." She held his gaze for a moment and then accepted this with the specific grace of someone who had thought about it and understood it even if some part of her was still bristled. "All right," she said. "What do we do?" "We keep watching," Harry said. "We stay ready. The attempt on the stone is coming, I don't know when, but it's coming. And when it does, I need to be there." "We need to be there," Ron said, without particular drama. Harry looked at him. "Don't do that thing where you look at me like I've said something noble," Ron said. "It's not noble. You're my friend, and the bloke who might come after you is the same one who made my mum cry for a year. I have a personal interest." "Okay," Harry said. "Okay," Ron said. Hermione had taken out a piece of parchment and was already writing. "I'm going to map out what we know about the protections between the 3rd-floor corridor and the stone," she said. "From the library, from what you've observed, from everything. If we know the layers, we can think about what defeating them actually requires, and whether the 3 of us have the requisite." She paused, because she was 11 and this was Voldemort. "The requisite capability." "The 3 of us might not need to defeat them," Harry said. Both of them looked at him. "If Quirrell gets past them," Harry said, "it won't be at the end of the protections that I stop him. It'll be at the beginning, before any of it matters." "You think you can stop him," Hermione said. "I know I can," Harry said, and the flatness of it was not arrogance. It was the same quality it had when he'd told Snape the statement of someone who had run the numbers. Ron looked at the fire for a moment. Then he said, "Right, good. Still want to map it, though." "So do I," Harry said. "Know your terrain before you enter it." Hermione smiled at her parchment. "Charles Xavier," she said. "What?" "That sounds like something Charles Xavier said." Harry thought about it. "Yeah," he said. "It does." The fire popped and settled, and outside the common room windows the November night was black and clear and full of stars, and the castle breathed its deep, slow breath around them, and Harry sat with the people who had decided he was worth keeping and felt, simply, ready. Chapter 4. Everything underground December came in cold and definitive, the kind of cold that settled into the castle's stones and made the corridors feel like they had opinions about the temperature. The grounds went white in the second week, and the lake froze at its edges first, then further out, until it was a flat gray-white disk in the landscape that the giant squid occasionally disturbed from below, leaving dark circles in the ice that students found either fascinating or ominous depending on their disposition. Harry found it fascinating. He found most things fascinating. It was a habit he'd developed early and had never found a reason to break. He was sitting on the cold stone steps outside the main entrance on a Sunday morning, early enough that the grounds were still empty, watching the ice patterns on the lake and thinking about Quirrell. The timeline had compressed in the last 2 weeks. He could feel it the way he felt weather changing, not in specifics yet, but in quality. The presence inside Quirrell had shifted from patient to restless, the low-banked frequency rising incrementally. And twice in the last week, Harry had caught Quirrell in corridor moments that had nothing to do with teaching. The man standing very still outside the third-floor corridor entrance in the middle of the night, visible through the castle's ambient awareness, as though something in him was being pulled in that direction, even when the rational Quirrell part was trying not to go. He was being drawn. The pull was getting stronger. Harry had 2 more letters from Charles in the past 3 weeks. Charles had, with the specificity of someone who understood both worlds now and had done extensive research, outlined what he understood of Voldemort's history and capability, the original, whole version, and what a significantly diminished fragment might be able to manage. It was, as frameworks went, useful. It confirmed what Harry had already assessed. That Quirrell at its current capacity was formidable for a wizard, serious but manageable for someone operating at Harry's level, and would likely become something else entirely if it successfully acquired the stone. The stone, therefore, did not become available. He was still working out the exact shape of his intervention, not because he was uncertain of his ability to stop whatever came, but because there was a difference between stopping something and stopping it in a way that didn't create secondary problems. He was thinking about Dumbledore. Dumbledore knew about the stone, had arranged the protections, and had clearly constructed a scenario in which the stone was accessible enough to be a lure and defended enough to expose anyone who went after it. This was the plan. It had the bones of good tactical thinking wrapped around an unexamined assumption, which was that the boy Dumbledore had intended to find at the end of those protections was the frightened, underprepared 11-year-old who'd survived Privet Drive by luck and love. That boy had never arrived. Harry thought about this for a while, watching the lake. A portion of the ice near the south edge cracked and refroze in a different configuration, which was beautiful in a small, quiet way. The problem was that if he ended this before Dumbledore's plan reached its natural conclusion, he would be doing to Dumbledore what Dumbledore had done to him, moving pieces without consulting the person the pieces belonged to. He didn't want to do that. He had specific reasons for not wanting to do that, most of them ethical and one of them tactical, which was that he needed Dumbledore as a potential ally more than he needed him as an opponent. So he would tell him. When the timing was closer to necessary rather than merely advisable, he stood, brushed snow off his jacket, and went inside for breakfast. The castle smelled of evergreen and warming charms. Christmas was 2 weeks away. The decorations had appeared overnight in the way Hogwarts did things, silently, comprehensively, as though the castle itself had opinions about the season and had acted on them. 12 trees in the Great Hall, garlands that moved in a non-existent breeze, candles floating where no candle holder existed. Harry walked through it with the same sense of recognition he'd felt since September, the resonance humming its comfortable frequency. He crossed the entrance hall and nearly walked into Neville. Neville Longbottom was, by several objective measures, the most consistently underestimated person at Hogwarts, which was a thing Harry had noticed in the first 2 weeks and continued to notice. He had a gift for herbology that was close to natural genius. Professor Sprout had twice stopped the class to point out something Neville had done correctly and thoroughly, and both times Neville had responded with the shocked pleasure of someone who kept being surprised to be good at things. He was also observant in a quiet way, the kind of careful attention that came from years of being overlooked, and therefore learning to notice details from the outside. "Harry," Neville said, slightly out of breath. "Good, I was looking for you. What happened?" "Nothing yet," Neville said with the specific emphasis of someone using yet deliberately. "But I saw something last night. I was up late, I couldn't sleep, and I saw Professor Quirrell going toward the 3rd floor. He paused. "I know we're not supposed to know anything about the 3rd floor, but I heard what happened at Halloween, with the troll. And I notice things. I notice when teachers look wrong." Harry looked at him steadily. "What time?" "Just past 2. He was alone." Neville's jaw was set with the expression of someone who had decided on a course of action that required overriding their natural instinct toward deference. "I don't know what's going on. I don't need to know. I just thought you should know he was up there." "You were right to tell me," Harry said. "Thank you." Neville nodded, clearly relieved to have the information out of his hands. Then he said, "Is it bad?" "Getting there," Harry said honestly. "We're staying ahead of it." Neville accepted this with the specific trust of someone who had decided to believe a person rather than needing to believe a plan, which Harry found more affecting than he expected. He went to find Ron and Hermione. Most of the school was going home for Christmas. Harry was not. He'd written to Charles about it, who had said, "Stay if it feels necessary. We'll be here when you come back. Jean is threatening to visit in January, and I have not decided yet whether to enable this." Logan had written separately a 4-line note that said, "Stay, finish the job, come back whole." This was, from Logan, the equivalent of an essay. Ron was staying too, because several of his brothers were staying, which meant his mother's care packages would be redirected to the castle, which Ron had explained to Harry was the actual reason. "Not the only reason," Ron clarified. "I know," Harry said. "I want to be here if something happens," Ron said. "That's also true." "I know that too." Hermione went home for Christmas, which Harry had expected and understood. Before she left, she pressed a rolled parchment into his hands, the complete map they'd built together over 6 weeks, every protection layer documented, every ward analyzed, every possible approach route considered. It was a piece of work that Hermione would have dismissed as preliminary notes, and that Harry thought was genuinely extraordinary. "Everything I could find," she said, "including 3 books from the restricted section that I technically borrowed without permission, so..." "Technically," Harry said. "The information was relevant," she said, with the complete ethical confidence of someone who had spent real time on the moral question and arrived at a defensible answer. "Be careful. Both of you. Write to me the moment anything changes." She hugged Ron, who looked briefly startled and then hugged back. She hugged Harry for longer, and Harry held on to the specific warmth of it the way you held onto things you might need later. "You'll be at platform 9 3/4, she said. "In January, both of you." "Both of us," Harry confirmed. She picked up her trunk and walked away down the platform, and Harry watched her go and thought, not for the first time, that the world was substantially better for containing Hermione Granger. The castle, with most of its students gone, was a different instrument. The corridors had a quality they didn't have when full, a spaciousness that let the older sounds through, the settling of stones, the particular acoustic of the wind in the towers. Harry liked it. He and Ron spent Christmas week in a rhythm of chess, meals in the smaller holiday dining setup, and long rambling walks around the grounds that were partly exercise and partly Harry familiarizing himself with every inch of the terrain. Christmas morning had a small pile of gifts. Ron received a sweater from his mother, hand-knitted, dark red, a gold lion on the front, and a package of homemade fudge and several other items from the assorted Weasleys, and the specific abundance of it was a physical thing in the room, this family's warmth expressed entirely through material form. Harry received a package from the Institute Jean had apparently coordinated. A firebolt maintenance kit from Logan, which was practical and exactly right. A book from Charles on magical theory that was 600 pages of genuinely dense material that Harry opened with real pleasure. A note from Oraro that was 2 sentences long and said the snow there must be beautiful. Remember what the snow means about the nature of change. Which was exactly what Oraro would say, and made Harry feel the distance between here and Westchester with a specific warmth rather than an ache. He also received, mysteriously, an invisibility cloak. It arrived without a note, silverlight in his hands, with the quality of something very old and very fine, not just a charm but something woven into the fabric itself, a true cloak of the kind he'd never encountered. He turned it over in his hands, felt the age of it, and understood instinctively that this had been his father's. He understood also, without needing confirmation, who had sent it. He held it for a while, not with anger. With the complicated feeling of someone who had received a genuine gift through the hands of a person whose motives he was still assessing, and was willing to hold both things at once. He put it carefully in his trunk and wrote Dumbledore a short note thanking him for it that contained zero information about whether he intended to use it, and sent it via the school owls. He received in return by evening a note that said, "Your father would be pleased. I suspect you'll make good use of it." A.D. Harry set it on his desk and thought, "We'll see." The new year arrived, the students returned, and January moved fast and cold, the way January does when you know something is building. Harry spent 2 weeks in a heightened state of readiness that looked from the outside like his ordinary state, which was the point. He had the conversation with Dumbledore on the 15th of January. He went directly to the headmaster's office. He'd mapped the gargoyle password early in the term, file it under useful, and the gargoyle let him up after a moment's consideration that felt almost like it was checking something, and he walked up the spiral staircase and knocked. "Come in," Dumbledore said, in the tone of someone who had known who was knocking. The office was all circular warmth and accumulated history, instruments that Harry could feel the age of, portraits of former headmasters asleep and awake, and a bird on a perch that was either a phoenix or performing very effectively as one. It looked at Harry with the specific intelligence of a creature that had been paying attention for a very long time. Harry sat. Dumbledore folded his hands. "I wondered when you'd come," Dumbledore said. "I've been expecting you for several weeks." "I wanted to be sure of what I was going to say," Harry said. "A reasonable precaution. Most people come to me before they're sure. What are you sure of?" "That Quirrell is hosting Voldemort," Harry said, and placed the name in the conversation without ceremony. "That Voldemort wants the stone. That the attempt is coming in the next month, possibly less. That the protections on the corridor will not stop him once he's committed fully." A pause. "And that your plan involves me finding this out and doing something about it. I wanted to tell you directly. I know. So we can build from there rather than around it." The office was quiet. The phoenix made a soft sound that might have been opinionated. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time with the expression that was becoming familiar, the one where the warm, old man performance stepped back and what was underneath it was genuinely seeing something. "You knew it was a test," Dumbledore said. "I suspected it had the bones of one," Harry said. "A stone that could restore Voldemort, placed in a school, behind protections that a clever and capable student could navigate, with the famous Harry Potter conveniently enrolled. The structural logic pointed at a scenario. And yet you didn't act earlier," Dumbledore said. "Why?" "Because I don't know the full picture," Harry said. "You do, and because ending this without your knowledge means doing to you what you did to me, moving pieces without asking the person they belong to." He held the old man's gaze. "I didn't want to do that." Something moved through Dumbledore's expression that was too complex to fully name. "You're angry with me," he said, "about the Dursleys. I understand your reasoning, Harry said. I think it was wrong, but I also know you carry it. I can see that clearly. So no, I'm not angry. I just wanted it named. He paused. Now it's named. What would you like to do? Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. The fire popped. The instruments on the shelves made their soft mechanical sounds. I've been monitoring Quirrell closely, Dumbledore said. There are contingencies in place. If he attempts to access the stone, each protection will slow him. The final one, the Mirror of Erised, will stop him. The stone is hidden inside the mirror in such a way that only someone who wants the stone, but not for personal use, can retrieve it. He paused. I had anticipated that it would stop Quirrell entirely. It might, Harry said, or the thing inside Quirrell might find a way around it. Voldemort is diminished, but he's not impaired in his capacity for logic. A pause. I want to be there when the attempt comes, not to stop your plan, to be the contingency behind your contingency. Dumbledore studied him. You're 11 years old, he said, not as a dismissal, but as a fact he was examining. I'm aware, Harry said. What you're carrying, what Xavier has trained you to, it's considerable. More considerable than I think even he fully appreciates. He appreciates it fairly completely, Harry said. A ghost of a smile crossed Dumbledore's face. I believe you. He was quiet again. Then, I won't tell you to stay out of it, Harry. I considered it. It would be both futile and wrong. He looked at his desk, at something Harry couldn't see. I ask only that you come and find me first when it begins, or at the same time. He paused. Not after. All right, Harry said. And I ask, Dumbledore paused, and what came next had the specific texture of something that cost him something to say. I ask that when this is over, you tell me what you know, what you see. In this school, in what you encounter, I'm aware that I planned for a version of you that didn't arrive. I would like to know the version that did. Harry held his gaze. This was, he thought, the most honest thing Dumbledore had said to him. I can do that, he said. Good, Dumbledore said simply. Harry stood. The attempt will come within the month. My best estimate is the 2nd or 3rd week of February. Mine as well, Dumbledore said. He was wrong by 4 days, which in the long game of these things was close to correct. The attempt came on a Tuesday in the 1st week of February. Harry knew it was happening at 11:47 p.m., not because he'd been monitoring Quirrell continuously, he'd been asleep, but because the castle told him. Not in language, in the specific change of frequency, a resonance disturbance in the upper floors that moved through the stones like a change in water pressure, and Harry was sitting up in bed with his eyes open before he'd consciously registered why. He had been ready for this. Not in the anxious, preparatory way of someone waiting for disaster, but in the clean, organized way of someone who had made their decisions in advance and needed only to execute them. He dressed in 40 seconds, pulled his wand, considered the cloak, decided against it. He was not going in as a shadow. He sent the castle's network of awareness, the thing he'd been quietly learning to read since September, the deep, ambient consciousness of Hogwarts itself, toward Dumbledore's office, a push of intention rather than telepathy, a request rather than intrusion. He didn't know if Dumbledore would receive it that way. He suspected the old man's sensitivity was sufficient. Then he went for the 3rd floor. The corridor was empty and cold in the way of places that had been recently disturbed. The door to the 3-headed dog's chamber was already open. Quirrell had been ahead of him by 8 or 9 minutes, Harry estimated, which meant the dog was handled and the protections below were already being worked through. He went through the door and the dog was asleep, the harp beside it still playing the same low melody through enchantment, and Harry dropped down through the trapdoor without hesitation. He fell through Devil's Snare, which attempted to bind him and released immediately, either because of the light charm he cast before landing, or because the plant responded to his resonance the way plants usually did when they encountered him in a good mood, and moved through the Winky chamber, where several keys were still spinning in disrupted patterns from Quirrell's passage. He broomless through this one was a fraction slower than it might have been, so he reached for the correct key with his telekinesis, felt through the swarm for the right match, old magic specific lock, the key that was tired from having been used once already, and opened the door clean. The troll chamber had a troll already knocked unconscious, which was either Quirrell's work or a previous protection. Harry stepped over it without slowing. The chess room was where he slowed. Because in the chess room, the pieces were in mid-game arrangement, Quirrell had played through it, which meant the pieces had reset, which meant Harry needed to play his own game. He looked at the board for a moment, running the same analysis he'd learned from Ron over 4 months of increasingly competitive matches, reading the sacrifice built into the game's design, the protected king pathway that required giving something up. He moved his queen forward. The pieces responded with the weight of the enchantment behind them. He played fast and correctly, not perfectly, correct was sufficient, and the path opened in 6 moves. Through into the potions chamber. 7 bottles, 1 riddling poem, the logic puzzle Hermione had mapped from her research. Harry read it twice, identified the solution in approximately 20 seconds, drank the correct bottle, and went through the black fire. On the other side, the mirror, and Quirrell. The defense professor was standing before the mirror of Arist with his back to Harry, and the quality of him had changed. The anxious surface, Quirrell that taught stuttering lessons about pixies, was entirely absent. What stood there was something using Quirrell's body with complete authority, the possession fully surfaced, the banked fire no longer banked at all. Harry felt it before he saw the shift, the temperature of the room, the specific resonance of something old and intent, and concentrated to a fine point. "I know you're there, Potter," said a voice from Quirrell's mouth that was not Quirrell's voice. Quieter, more precise. With a quality to it that Harry's telepathy touched and found genuinely remarkable. A mind of extraordinary power reduced to this, to a shell, to borrowed breath, and still carrying the absolute conviction of someone who had never accepted the possibility of failure. "Voldemort," Harry said. Quirrell turned. His face was Quirrell's face, but the expression on it was something else entirely, measured, intelligent, looking at Harry with the specific quality of someone encountering unexpected data and processing it with admirable speed. "Ah," said the voice, "you're not what I expected." "I know," Harry said. "I get that a lot." "Xavier's boy," Voldemort said, through Quirrell's mouth with the tone of someone who had done research. "The Omega mutant. The weapon Charles Xavier has been quietly building in New York." A pause. "I had wondered if you'd come." "I'm not a weapon," Harry said. "Everyone with power is a weapon," Voldemort said, and there was something in the flatness of it that suggested genuine belief rather than rhetoric. "The only question is whether you choose your targets or someone else chooses them for you. Dumbledore would have you choose his. I find myself curious whether you'd consider other arrangements." "No," Harry said simply. "You haven't heard my offer." "I don't need to," Harry said. "You're a consciousness wearing a stolen body because you couldn't finish dying gracefully. Going after a stone so you can rebuild yourself and resume killing people for reasons that stopped being cogent decades ago. I don't have a version of this conversation that ends with me helping you." Quirrell's face smiled with Voldemort's expression, which was an eerie conjunction. "You're very confident." "I'm accurate," Harry said. "And if I told you," Voldemort said, the voice dropping to something quieter, "that your parents died because Dumbledore's plans put them in the path of my plans, and both of us are more responsible for their deaths than you know, would that change your alignment?" Harry felt the weight of it land. He was not unaffected. He had enough honesty for that. There was a specific grief that lived in the photograph in his trunk and the green light of old dreams, and this voice knew exactly where to aim. "It might change my feelings about Dumbledore," Harry said. "It doesn't change anything about you." He paused. "Step away from the mirror. Or we do this the fast way," Harry said. "I'd rather not. There's a version of you that didn't start out as this. You were born Tom Riddle. You were 11 once. You had something that might have been different. I don't want to obliterate that, even what's left of it." He held Quirrell's gaze steadily. "But I will if you make me." Something moved through Voldemort's expression, a ripple in the control, the briefest displacement. "Sentimental," he said. "Accurate," Harry said again. Quirrell moved. "Not with magic first. with physical velocity, a lunge, which surprised Harry for exactly a third of a second before his kinesis had already compensated. Quirrell's momentum redirected sideways the same way the Troll's had been. The same principle, mass into sideways, except Quirrell was upright again in 2 seconds because whatever was in him was not going to stay down. Then the magic came. 3 curses in fast succession. No incantation. Voldemort had gone past the need for spoken spells in his original body, and the fragment of him in Quirrell could apparently still access that. Harry caught the first on his telekinetic field, dispersed it, moved for the second, a cutting curse that he redirected into the stone floor with enough precision to spare the mirror, and the third he stepped through, using the invisibility of intention that Logan had drilled into him over years of physical training, the thing Logan called not being where you are. He came up inside Quirrell's reach. He put his hand on Quirrell's arm. He had not intended this. He had intended a psionic strike, a direct override of Quirrell's motor function, clean and controlled, enough to stop the body without damaging the mind beyond what the possession had already done. What happened instead was something he hadn't fully anticipated, and Charles had theorized and Ollivander had wondered about. The interaction between his magical core and his psionic ability, in direct contact with a body carrying a piece of Voldemort, produced something that was neither purely magical nor purely psionic. It was both. The effect was immediate and physical. Quirrell screamed. The skin under Harry's hand went white, then cracked, and Harry held on because stopping before it was finished would be worse than finishing it. And what he felt under his hands was Voldemort's presence burning against his power like 2 opposing magnets forced into contact. Wrong frequency against wrong frequency. The remnant soul tearing where Harry's hybrid energy touched it. It lasted 8 seconds. Then Quirrell collapsed, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply, and something passed through the air between them, thin, dark, furious, and diminishing, the last gasp of something that had refused to die and now had no choice about it. And then it was gone, through the wall and away into whatever darkness waited for things that had burned their way through too many lives, and the room was quiet. Harry stepped back, looked at his hands. They were fine. They were shaking slightly, which he acknowledged as accurate and not alarming. Quirrell on the floor was breathing. Unconscious, but breathing. The burned marks on his arms were the evidence of what had happened here, and Harry crouched beside him and checked his pulse with 2 fingers and found it threadier than ideal but present. He became aware, at this point, of the mirror. He had not tried to take the stone. He had not looked directly into the mirror. But now, crouching in the room with the mirror at his back, he turned and looked at it. His reflection looked back at him. It was him, ordinary him, the same dark hair and green eyes and slightly surprised expression, except that in the reflection, the people standing behind him were not the empty room. They were the Institute, Charles in his chair, hands folded, with the expression of quiet, profound satisfaction. Jean with both arms around him from behind, which meant her chin was on his head. Logan standing at the back with his arms crossed and the look he used when he was proud of someone and was hoping no one could tell. Auraro, Scott, Hank, and beside them 2 people he had only in a photograph, a woman with dark red hair and his eyes, and a man with dark hair and a warm, open face, and they were not sad. They were the opposite of sad. They were the expression of people watching something they had hoped for. Harry looked at this for a long time. Then he felt a hand on his shoulder and found Dumbledore standing behind him, which meant the old man had made it down through the protections with impressive speed for someone of his age, and was looking at the mirror with his own expression, which Harry did not examine. "Is it finished?" Dumbledore asked. "Quirrell needs immediate medical attention," Harry said. "Voldemort is, I don't know exactly what remains, very little. Enough to find another vessel, possibly if it persists, but not soon." "Not with strength." "The stone," Dumbledore said. "I didn't take it," Harry said. "I don't know where it is. I assume the mirror still has it." Dumbledore moved to the mirror, and Harry stepped back and gave him the room, because there were things in this that didn't belong to him. He heard Dumbledore do something with the mirror, a specific magical action that resonated in a register Harry recognized as very advanced and walked around the edge of at least two things he would need years of practice to replicate. Then Dumbledore turned and looked at him with the full weight of his attention. "You came when it started," Dumbledore said. "I felt the alert." "I wasn't sure you would receive it that way," Harry said. "I've been sensitive to that particular frequency of the castle's communication for 40 years, Dumbledore said. "You broadcast through it with considerable natural fluency for someone who arrived in September." A pause. "Harry, sir, what did it feel like?" Dumbledore asked, and the question had a specific quality to it, not prurient, not tactical. The genuine question of someone who needed to understand what had happened here. Harry thought about it honestly. "Like completing a circuit," he said. "Something that was supposed to connecting. I didn't plan it. The contact just resolved." Dumbledore was quiet. "The magic in your scar," he said slowly. "What happened to your parents? There was always the possibility that Voldemort's choice to mark you as his equal created a connection that ran in both directions." He paused. "I hadn't anticipated that your other capabilities might interact with it." "Neither had I," Harry said. "I'm going to need to write to Charles about this." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I would like to be included in that conversation if you're willing." Harry looked at him. They were standing in a room underground in a cold castle in February, and Quirrell was unconscious on the floor, and the world's most dangerous dark wizard was somewhere between extremely diminished and actually gone, and the old man across from him was asking to be included. "All right," Harry said. Dumbledore nodded, and some of the weight in him shifted, not disappeared, never disappeared with a man like this, but redistributed. "I'll take Quirrell to Madame Pomfrey." He looked at Harry carefully. "Are you injured? Are you shaken?" Harry thought about this honestly. "A little," he said. "I'll be all right." "I know," Dumbledore said, with the specific certainty of someone who had now seen the evidence. "Go back to your dormitory, Harry. Let your friends know you're safe. I suspect Mr. Weasley has been awake since you left." Harry almost asked how Dumbledore knew Ron would be awake, but the answer was obvious. Dumbledore knew because Dumbledore noticed things, and one of the things he had clearly updated his assessment on was the quality of the people around Harry Potter. He went back up through the protections, Quirrell over Dumbledore's shoulder, moving with the strange, weightless efficiency of a man who had carried heavier things than this, and climbed out into the third-floor corridor, and walked back to Gryffindor Tower in the quiet, dark castle. The common room had one lamp burning. Ron was in the armchair nearest the fire, technically asleep, actually the light sleep of someone who had been waiting and had lost the fight with consciousness approximately 20 minutes ago. Harry sat in the chair across from him and looked at the fire for a while. Then Ron woke up, the way people do when they've been half waiting, and blinked and looked at Harry and read whatever was in Harry's face. "Done," he said. "Done," Harry said. Ron was quiet for a moment. "Voldemort, gone or very close to it, quarrels with Madame Pomfrey." Ron absorbed this. He did not ask for details yet. This was one of the things Harry appreciated most about Ron, the instinct for what a person needed first. "Are you all right?" "Getting there," Harry said. "I'll be better once I've slept." "Right." Ron looked at the fire. "Hermione's going to be furious she missed it." "She'll be more furious that she already knew most of it before it happened," Harry said. Ron grinned. It was tired and genuine and warm. "True. She'll write an essay about it and say she nearly predicted it, and technically she'll be right." He stood, stretching. "Come on then, actual sleep." "In a minute," Harry said. Ron left. Harry stayed by the fire a little longer, holding the image from the mirror, Charles's expression, Jean's arms, Logan's carefully neutral face that wasn't neutral, and the two people at the back with his eyes and his father's hair, proud and not sad. He let himself have it, fully, without managing it, the grief and the warmth of it together, which was what it actually was, not one or the other but both, simultaneous, which was the only honest way to carry people you loved who weren't here. He stayed by the fire until the coals went from orange to red to dark, and then he went to bed. He wrote to Charles in the morning, 6 pages, everything, the whole shape of it. He wrote honestly about the contact, the effect, what it had felt like from the inside. He wrote about the mirror. He wrote about Dumbledore. He wrote, I think I want to come back next year. I think this is somewhere I'm supposed to be, which I know is the kind of thing you taught me to be careful about, destiny being a thing people use to avoid making choices. But I don't mean it that way. I mean I've found people worth staying for and a place that recognizes something in me and work that matters. I think that's different from destiny. I think that's just home. He sealed it and sent it. The reply took 2 days, which was fast, and it said a great deal in Charles's careful, measured way, but the line Harry read 3 times was near the end. I know what you mean. It is different. I'm very glad you found it. Come home for the summer. Bring your friends if they'll come. Jean has already threatened to invite them, which I'm told is how she processes caring about people. Tell them they're welcome. You did well, Harry. You did very well. Harry folded the letter, put it with the others, and went to find Ron and tell him about the summer invitation. Ron's response was immediate and enthusiastic, and involved several questions about whether the Xavier Institute had a basketball court, which Harry had not expected, but somehow perfectly fit the shape of the day, and the shape of the year, and the shape of the person Ron Weasley was, someone who could receive extraordinary news and arrive immediately at the most human possible question about it. Harry answered every question, and the February light came through the common room windows, cold and clean and very clear, and the castle breathed its slow old breath around them, and somewhere in the grounds the ice on the lake was beginning, very slightly, to thaw. Chapter 5. 2 Worlds, 1 Boy. February became March the way winter becomes spring in Scotland. Not gracefully, not with any particular ceremony, just a slow, reluctant thaw that happened between one day and the next, and left the grounds wet and brown, and full of the smell of things returning. The lake shed its ice from the edges inward over the course of 2 weeks, and the castle seemed to exhale, and the students shed their extra layers in stages, as though testing whether the warmth was real or a temporary misunderstanding. Harry noticed all of it. He was in the habit of noticing things, and the world after the underground room had a quality of extra clarity, the way everything looked sharper after you've been frightened and found you were fine. Not sharper in detail, in significance. The morning light through the great hall windows. The specific sound of Hermione and Ron arguing about something that was genuinely interesting to both of them, which sounded like fighting, but was actually their version of affection. Neville's herbs growing in pots on the dormitory windowsill, 3 different species he'd transplanted from the greenhouses, all of them visibly thriving under his attention in a way that wasn't accidental. These things were real and good, and Harry held them as such, which was something Charles had taught him. Don't be so focused on the threat you stop seeing what you're protecting. Quirrell was gone. Not dead. Harry had been clear about that with himself, because the distinction mattered. Madame Pomfrey had worked through the night, and the medical report as relayed by Dumbledore was that Quirrell had survived but would not be returning to his position, that the extensive physical damage from the possession was recoverable in body, if not entirely in the longer sense. There was no announcement to the school, just the quiet replacement of defense classes with a rotating series of visiting lecturers who were, uniformly, better teachers than Quirrell had been, which said something about the year they'd had. The official story, to the extent that there was one for general consumption, was a health emergency. Harry had been in the hospital wing briefly for observation. Nothing more was publicly announced. This lasted approximately 3 days before the version that circulated among students diverged extensively from the official account, which was the inevitable thermodynamic consequence of putting a secret in a building containing several hundred adolescents with both magic and curiosity. By the end of the first week of February, the story circulating in Gryffindor was that Harry had fought something dark on the 3rd floor. By the second week, it had acquired embellishments. A dragon featured in one version, which Ron found hilarious. In another, Harry had apparently defeated someone described as a great dark spirit while simultaneously catching the snitch, which combined 2 separate facts about him in a way that was technically not impossible, but definitely didn't happen. Harry declined to comment on any of it. Not out of false modesty, he was genuinely uninterested in managing his own mythology, which had been a going concern since he arrived at King's Cross in September. It was less that he didn't want credit, and more that the relationship between what he had done and what people chose to say about it was simply not something he had energy to steward. Hermione returned from Christmas break already informed. He'd written to her the morning after, the factual account, and her first question off the train had been about the psionic magical interaction in the contact with Quirrell. Not "are you all right," which she'd established in the letter exchange, but the scientific question, which was in its own way a more intimate one because it meant she already knew he was fine and wanted to understand what had happened rather than needing to check on him. He appreciated this distinction enormously. "The question I can't answer from the literature," she said, dropping her bag in the common room with the energy of someone who had been thinking about this for 2 weeks and finally had the subject in the room, "is whether the interaction was specific to Voldemort's particular form of possession, or whether it's something that would happen with any significant magical psionic conflict. Because if it's the former, it's a unique event. If it's the latter, the implications for understanding how the two power systems interact are." She waved a hand at the magnitude of what she meant. "I don't know," Harry said honestly. "I've sent the question to Charles and to Hank. He's the research lead at the Institute. I'm waiting for the analysis. I'd like to read it when it comes. I assumed that. I want to write my own observations," she said. "From external perspective, what I know about your psionic capabilities and what the magical theory would predict about the interaction. Comparative analysis." Ron looked up from his chess puzzle. "You've been home for 3 hours." "I've been thinking about this for 3 weeks," Hermione said without remorse. Harry had spent those same 3 weeks in the post-event space that he recognized from other high-stakes moments. The Institute's training scenarios, the 2 genuine emergencies he'd been part of before coming to Hogwarts, which was not a recovery exactly, since he hadn't been damaged, but a kind of reintegration. The thing that needed to settle was less what had happened and more what it meant about what was possible, which was a larger question that required more room to think about than a February weekend could provide. He gave it room. He went to classes. He flew, Quidditch practice twice a week, and individual flying on the evenings between, because the air was cold and clear, and the broom was still the one place where every sense was engaged simultaneously in a way that left no room for anything else. He played chess with Ron and lost more often than he won, which remained instructive. He spent long evenings in the library with Hermione, both of them reading different things and occasionally passing notes that were either relevant to the research or increasingly tangential to it. He was happy. This was the thing he kept returning to, the fact of it, clean and unexpected, not in spite of everything that had happened but including it, threaded through it. In the 3rd week of March, Jean arrived. She had not formally announced this. Her letter, which Harry received on the 17th, said, "I'm visiting the weekend of the 20th. Charles says this is fine. Logan says to tell you he's not coming, which means he wanted to come and won't admit it. I'll be at Hogsmeade Station Saturday at 10. Bring your friends." Harry had shown this to Ron and Hermione. Hermione had said, "Jean Grey. She trained you, the telekinetic." "She's more than that," Harry said. She's my sister, basically." Ron said, "Is she the one Charles said screamed when you made the Quidditch team?" "Yes. I like her already," Ron said. He went to Dumbledore about the visit, because the instinct to navigate things with Dumbledore directly rather than around him was becoming standard practice, and found the old man both unsurprised and immediately cooperative. A guest pass for Jean, permission to spend the day in Hogsmeade, and the specific warmth of someone who approved of what the visit represented even if he didn't say so explicitly. "She'll want to see you're well," Dumbledore said. "She already knows I'm well," Harry said. "She wants to see it. There's a difference," Dumbledore agreed. Hogsmeade on Saturday was cold and bright, the village dusted with the last of the winter and the first of the spring in equal measure. Smoke from chimneys, and the smell of the bakery on the main street, and puddles that hadn't decided whether to freeze or thaw. Harry walked down from the castle with Ron and Hermione and felt the specific anticipatory pleasure of someone about to give two things they loved the chance to meet. Jean was at the station. She was wearing a dark green jacket and her red hair was loose, and she was clearly trying to look like she wasn't watching the road from the castle, and failing. And when Harry came around the corner, she covered the distance between them in the time it would have taken most people to register he was there. She held on for a long moment, and Harry held on back, and this was not a social performance. It was simply what it was. "You're taller," she said into his shoulder. "It's been 6 months. Don't do that. Don't be rational about it." She pulled back and looked at him with the specific assessment she'd been performing since he was 6 years old, checking for damage the way she always did and finding none and recalibrating from worried to satisfied by slow increments. Then she looked past him at Ron and Hermione. "These are your friends." "Jean Grey," Harry said. "Hermione Granger, Ron Weasley." Jean shook Ron's hand with the directness of someone who had grown up in a world where people shook hands over their abilities rather than their backgrounds. And Ron responded with the uncomplicated warmth he brought to meeting new people he'd already decided he was going to like. She turned to Hermione, and Harry watched the moment where two people who were both very good at reading people read each other simultaneously and came to rapid mutual conclusions. "You're the one writing the comparative analysis," Jean said. Hermione blinked. "Harry told you about that?" "He sent it to Hank. Hank sent it to Charles. Charles mentioned it to me." Jean smiled, and it was warm and direct and genuine. "It's a good framework. Hank has notes." Hermione's eyes lit with the specific illumination of someone who had just been told that someone they respected had opinions about their work. "I'd like to read them." "I brought copies," Jean said. "Later. Right now, I want to see this village and eat something, and you can tell me about the year." They spent the morning in the way that good days accumulate themselves, no particular agenda, the shape of it emerging from 4 people who liked each other, finding the natural rhythm of shared time. They went to the bakery on the main street because the smell was impossible to ignore, and sat at a corner table with pastries and tea, while Ron explained Quidditch to Jean with the evangelical energy he brought to anything he genuinely loved. And Jean listened with the quality of attention she gave to everything, and asked 3 questions that were so specifically good that Ron looked at Harry with the expression of someone discovering that a person was exactly as advertised. "She's great," Ron said to Harry, not quietly. "I'm right here," Jean said. "I know," Ron said. "That's why I said it." Jean laughed, and Harry felt the warmth of it like a second thing happening underneath the first, the specific pleasure of the people in your life becoming real to each other rather than names. After the bakery, they walked the village, and Harry fell into step beside Jean and let the others drift slightly ahead, which was not managed. It just happened, the way space opens between people who need to talk. "Tell me," Jean said. Not about the underground room, she knew that story. She meant the larger thing. The year, the shape of it, he told her. He talked for 20 minutes with the unedited quality he only had with her and Charles. And now, with Ron and Hermione, the version that included not just what had happened but what it had felt like, which was different and more important. He told her about the castle recognizing something in him, about the Sorting Hat's long pause and what it had said about his mind. About Dumbledore and the Cold War wrapped in polite conversation that had eventually become something less adversarial and more honest. About Snape, who was the most complicated man he'd met since Charles, which was a high bar. About the mirror. Jean listened to the mirror part with the stillness she reserved for things that mattered. "What did you do with it?" she said, seeing them. "I held it," Harry said. "The whole thing, all of it. The grief and the yeah," he said, "both." She was quiet for a moment. "Charles will be glad to hear that." "I know. He worries," she said. "Not that you can't handle things. He worries about whether you let yourself have the things that are hard. There's a difference." Harry thought about Charles, the evening conversations, the patient way he had of sitting with the complicated things without trying to simplify them, the specific quality of being known by someone who had looked carefully and not looked away. I know there's a difference, he said. I try to do the second one. I'm getting better at it. Jean looked at him sideways. You really are taller, she said. Inches or otherwise. Both, she said, and bumped his shoulder with hers, which was the Jean Grey version of a lot of things. They found Hermione and Ron at the bookshop, which Harry had not anticipated but immediately understood was inevitable once Hermione was placed in a village with a bookshop, and spent an hour browsing. Jean found a text on European magical history that she bought immediately with the enthusiasm of someone who had been reading about this world for 6 months and wanted more primary sources. Ron found a Quidditch almanac and spent 30 minutes in a running argument with the proprietor about a statistics discrepancy that the proprietor found increasingly impressive rather than irritating. Hermione found Harry in the back corner where he was standing with a very thin book he'd taken from a shelf almost at random. What is it? She asked. He showed her. Junctions. A History of Convergent Power in Magical Europe, published 1921, author unknown. Small, poorly bound, the kind of text that ended up in the back of old bookshops because nobody academic thought it was credible. The index mentions psionic magical interaction, Harry said. 3 entries. I don't know if any of it's good, but buy it, Hermione said immediately. He bought it. He also bought 2 other texts he'd found, and Jean paid for all of them before he could stop her, with the expression of someone who had been given a task and was completing it. He understood, reading the quality of it, that Charles had said something to her about buying him books, and he let her do it because the gesture was Charles's as much as hers. They had lunch at the 3 Broomsticks, which was warm and noisy, and served butter beer that Harry found interesting and Ron found perfect and Jean found unexpectedly good, and Hermione found statistically excessive in its sugar content and drank anyway. After lunch, Ron went briefly back to the castle for an owl order he'd forgotten to send, which Harry suspected was less about the owl order and more about the instinct to give people space at the right moment, and Hermione was absorbed in Jean's copy of Hank's analysis notes, and Harry and Jean sat at the table with their cups and the quiet that they both knew how to use. He wants to talk to you, Jean said. Charles, not by letter. I know, Harry said. Have you thought about when? Easter break, Harry said. I was going to come home. Bring someone, Jean said. Hermione or Ron or both. He meant it, he wants to meet them. They'd come, Harry said. Ron would lose his mind over the danger room. Logan would love that, Jean said. He'd terrify him. Ron doesn't terrify easily. Logan would treat that as a challenge. Harry smiled at his cup. Easter, he said. I'll write to him tonight. Jean was quiet for a moment, and then she said, with the specific care she brought to things she'd been holding for a while, I need to tell you something, not bad, she added immediately, reading whatever was in his face. Just information. And I need you to receive it the way you receive things, which you're good at. Tell me, Harry said. Hank and Charles have been doing deeper analysis on the event with Quirrell, she said. What happened in the contact? What the magical psionic interaction produced? She paused. Charles thinks and Hank agrees, and I've read everything they've written and I agree too that what happened wasn't a side effect. It wasn't incidental to your power. The interaction, the way the magical core and the psionic ability merged in that moment, it's the thing. It's what you are, not 2 systems running parallel, one system that expresses in 2 registers simultaneously. Harry held this. He thinks there's more, Jean said. More than what you've accessed, more than what we've seen. Not more power exactly more, she searched for the word. Depth, Harry said. Yes, she said. And he thinks the magical environment is where it develops. That's part of why Hogwarts feels like it recognizes you. You're not just a mutant who also does magic. You're something the castle has a resonance with because what you are is genuinely convergent. It's been waiting for something like you for. She paused, possibly a very long time. Harry was quiet for a moment. Outside the 3 Broomsticks the March afternoon had gone golden and low slanting, the light doing the thing it does in early spring where it's almost too warm for what the air temperature would suggest. Does that change anything? He asked. No, Jean said. That's why I could tell you. It doesn't change anything you need to do differently. You're already doing it. She paused. Charles just wanted you to know why it feels the way it feels, the resonance, the castle, why flying feels the way it does, and why the contact with Voldemort resolved the way it did. You weren't lucky. You weren't even just prepared. You were compatible. Harry thought about the mirror. The image of Charles and Jean and Logan behind him and the two people at the back. Did he say anything else? Jean looked at him with the specific gentleness she reserved for the things that needed it. He said your parents would have understood this about you immediately, she said. Not just your mum, both of them. He said James Potter, from everything he's read, was exactly the kind of person who would have loved having a son who was the most complicated thing anyone had ever seen. Harry looked at the table for a moment, then out the window, where the afternoon was doing its golden thing over the village. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, Jean agreed. Ron came back from the castle in the way he arrived everywhere, slightly breathless and carrying several additional items he'd picked up on the way, and the afternoon completed itself in the way that good days complete themselves. With no particular conclusion, just the shape of it arriving at its natural end, the light changing and the walk back to the castle and Jean's hand briefly on Harry's shoulder at the Hogsmeade gates. Easter, she said. Easter, Harry confirmed. She looked at the castle, the way everyone looked at it the first time and some subsequent times, the towers and the warmth of its lights and the quality of something ancient and inhabited in the best sense. It's extraordinary, she said. The place. I know, Harry said. Good, she said. It should be. She took the path back toward Hogsmeade Station, her green jacket visible for a long time in the early evening light, and Harry watched until the path curved and she was gone, and then turned back to the castle with his friends. Dumbledore called him to the office the following Thursday. Not urgently, by letter, which arrived at breakfast with the patient tone of someone making a scheduled appointment rather than a demand. Harry went at 7 in the evening, and the office was lit warm and the phoenix was awake on its perch, and something about the atmosphere was different from his previous visits, a quality of arriving at something rather than approaching it. He sat. Dumbledore sat. I've been in correspondence with Charles, Dumbledore said. I know, Harry said. He told me. He is, as I suspected, a remarkable man. A pause. We disagree about several things. I assumed that. We agree about more than I expected, Dumbledore said, and the candor of it was genuine. He has been more transparent with me than I deserved, given certain decisions I made without his knowledge or consent. He told me directly that he considers the Dursley arrangement the worst choice I made in a long career of some genuinely poor choices. A pause. He was diplomatic about the wording, less diplomatic about the content. That sounds like Charles, Harry said. He also told me that if I attempt to leverage Harry Potter's sense of obligation to the magical world in ways that prioritize my agenda over his personhood, he will have opinions about it. He expressed this quite calmly. Dumbledore's eyes were doing their twinkling thing, but underneath it was something more serious. I believe him. You should, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him steadily. I want to tell you something, Harry. I want to tell you what I actually believe about you, not the managed version, not the version designed to guide you toward a particular conclusion. He folded his hands. I believe that what happened in the underground chamber was not the end of the confrontation with Voldemort. I believe that what remains of him will find a way to persist, to rebuild, and that the conflict will come again in some form. He paused. I believe that when it does, your capabilities will be central to how it resolves. Not because destiny is a real mechanism, I've become increasingly skeptical of prophecy as prescription, but because you are already the most capable individual I have encountered since. He stopped, since myself at a comparable age, and I'm aware of how that sounds. It sounds honest, Harry said. I'd rather honest than managed. I know, Dumbledore said. I'm learning that. A pause. I used to believe that managing people, guiding them, constructing the path, arranging the pieces, was a form of wisdom, that I could see far enough ahead to justify it. He was quiet for a moment. I met you in September, and I have been rethinking this premise continuously since. I'm glad, Harry said. Not glad that I made things difficult. You didn't make things difficult, Dumbledore said. You made things clear. There's a difference. Clarity is not the same as comfort, but it is considerably more useful. His eyes were level. I would like to be someone you can come to with information. Not because I need to know everything, but because I am, whatever my flaws, genuinely trying to protect the people in this school. And I am better at that when I'm working with accurate information. Harry thought about this genuinely. Thought about the Cold War they'd been running since the first day, the chess game with no declared players, the months of parallel maneuvering around the same events. He thought about the conversation after the underground room, the way Dumbledore had asked to be included. He thought about the letter to Charles. All right, Harry said. I'll tell you what I know, in exchange for one thing. Dumbledore waited. Don't plan my path, Harry said. Don't arrange my encounters or manage my understanding to produce a particular result. If you have information I need, give it to me directly and trust me to do something reasonable with it. A pause. I'm not saying you can't have strategies. I'm saying I need to not be one of the pieces. That's a fair exchange, Dumbledore said quietly. And when I disagree with you, disagree with me, Dumbledore said. Freely. I have been disagreed with by better minds than mine, and it has improved my thinking every time, even when I didn't admit it immediately. Something moved across his face, old and complex. You remind me of someone, Harry. Not your father, though you have his instincts. Someone older. Someone I once. He stopped. That's another conversation, for another time. All right, Harry said. There was a quiet in the room that was the quiet of two people who had reached an understanding and were sitting with the weight of it before moving. The phoenix made a soft sound on its perch. One of the instruments on the shelves spun in a slow golden rotation, and Harry watched it and thought about what Dumbledore had not quite said, the someone older, the implicit history in it, and filed it carefully, not for now but for later. The stone, Harry said. Will be destroyed, Dumbledore said. Nicholas has agreed. It was the right conclusion. I should have reached it sooner. A pause. He is very old and his wife is older, and they have, I think, been ready for some time. The elixir was always borrowed time. And Quirrell. Recovering, Dumbledore said. He will not return to teaching. The damage of the possession is significant, but he is alive, which is more than he might have been. He looked at Harry. You were careful. I tried to be. The intent to preserve him even at the cost of a cleaner resolution that came from you, not from your training. My training gave me the option, Harry said. I made the choice. Yes, Dumbledore said. That's the point. He walked back to the common room through the castle that was evening dark and warm with its populated night sounds. The distant noise from the Hufflepuff common room. Two prefects arguing about the patrol's schedule somewhere on the 4th floor. The specific hush of the library as he passed it. And arrived to find Ron and Hermione in the good armchairs with the chess board between them and a pot of hot chocolate that smelled extraordinary. Ron looked up. How'd it go? Harry dropped into the 3rd chair. Well, he said, honestly well. Hermione poured him a cup without being asked, which was a thing she did when she had decided someone needed looking after and preferred to show it through action. Did he tell you what happens next year? She asked. Number, good, she said, because I have theories. Of course you do, Ron said to the chessboard. They're good theories, she said. They're always good theories, Ron said. That's the terrifying part, your move. Hermione moved her bishop with the decisive click of someone who had been thinking about this position, while conducting an entirely different conversation. Ron looked at the board, and then at Harry, and then back at the board with the expression of someone who had walked into something they hadn't seen coming. She's been planning that for 20 minutes, Harry said. I know, Ron said. I should have seen it. He moved his rook with the resigned accuracy of someone making the best available play in a losing position. In my defense, I was listening to you lot talk. Don't blame noble behavior for tactical failure, Harry said. Ron looked at him. Did Snape tell you that? No, Harry said. Logan. Logan sounds terrifying. He is, Harry said, but in the way that means you're safe in most situations you'd otherwise find threatening. I want to meet him, Ron said. Easter, Harry said. Ron's expression moved through surprise and then immediately into the specific delight of someone who had been told they were going somewhere genuinely interesting. The Institute, actual with the training room and the… Yes, Harry said. Ron turned to Hermione. We're going to America. I know, Hermione said. I've already written a list of questions for Professor Xavier. How long ago did you write this list? The day Harry mentioned Easter as a possibility. Ron stared at her. When was that? 3 weeks ago. Ron turned back to Harry. She's been holding a list of questions for Charles Xavier for 3 weeks. I know, Harry said. She showed me they're good questions. Ron looked at the ceiling. Right, we're all like this. He moved a pawn with the energy of someone accepting an inevitable truth. I'm the normal one, aren't I? You're the chess one, Harry said. Chess and normal, Ron said. That's me. You're the loyal one, Hermione said. It's more important. Ron looked at her with the slightly startled expression of someone who'd received a genuine compliment from an unexpected direction. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then said, Checkmate in 3, by the way. Hermione looked at the board. Her expression did the thing where she ran ahead of the position rapidly and arrived at the conclusion. Oh, she said. That's yes. How long have you had that? 8 moves, Ron said, with the immense satisfaction of someone whose gifts had been properly recognized. Hermione studied the board with the focus of someone filing a defeat as information. Good, she said. Again. Ron reset the board with practiced speed. Harry leaned back in his chair with his hot chocolate and felt the specific quality of the evening, warm and lit, and full of people doing the things they were good at in the company of people who were glad they were there, and held it the same way he'd held the mirror's image, the same way Jean had told him Charles wanted him to hold things. Fully, without managing it. The fire was warm and the hot chocolate was good, and outside the castle windows, the spring night was coming on dark and clear, the stars appearing one by one the way they did when the sky was cooperating, and somewhere below the grounds the lake was completely free of ice now, its surface moving with the particular aliveness of deep water in early spring. He'd been here 7 months. 7 months since he'd walked through the barrier at King's Cross, with a wand that felt like recognition, and a name that had arrived ahead of him. 7 months of a castle that breathed its own frequency, and a school that had taken him in with its own specific blend of wonder and expectation, and increasingly, something that felt less like expectation and more like knowing. He thought about what Jean had said. Not 2 systems running parallel, 1 system expressing in 2 registers. He thought about what that meant for next year and the year after, for the shape of what he was becoming. He thought about Voldemort, diminished but not entirely gone, somewhere out there in whatever form remained, with the specific persistence of something that had decided to survive beyond any reasonable point. He thought about Dumbledore sitting in his warm office full of instruments, working through the slow recalibration of someone who had found that their model of the world needed revision. He thought about Snape, who was teaching his potions classes with the usual stringency, and whose expression in the corridor sometimes had the quality of someone who had won something they hadn't been sure they'd win. He thought about his parents, because he could think about them now, not in the old reflexive way of the photograph in the trunk that he'd look at quickly and put away, but openly, with the full weight of what they were to him. 2 people who had loved him enough to die for him at 21, which was younger than Jean was now, which was a thing he sat with, and let be the size it actually was. 2 people whose absence was a real and permanent shape in his life, and who were also, in the most honest accounting, still here in his eyes and his instincts, and the specific quality of the magic that had come down to him, through blood and choice, and the impossible coincidence of being exactly what he was. The fire shifted. Ron laughed at something Hermione had said. The castle breathed. Harry Potter, who was an Omega-level mutant and a wizard and 11 years old, and someone's son and someone's student and someone's friend, and most importantly himself, set down his cup, leaned forward and said, "Deal me in on the next game." "You play chess," Hermione said. "Ron's been teaching me," Harry said. Ron looked at him with the expression of a man reviewing 7 months of conversations and finding an omission. "You've been letting me teach you chess while knowing how to do." He gestured broadly at everything Harry was. "And you've been losing to me on purpose." "I've been losing to you because I'm still learning," Harry said. "There's a difference." "You said that about transfiguration," Ron said. "It was true then, too." Ron stared at him for a long moment, then reset the board for 3 players with the specific energy of someone who had decided to find this funny rather than alarming. "Right. Hermione, explain the 3-player variant." Hermione explained the 3-player variant, which was considerably more complicated than the standard game, and which she had apparently also researched 3 weeks ago. And the evening continued, longer than it should have given that it was a Thursday with classes tomorrow. But nobody mentioned this, because some evenings have their own momentum, and the decent thing is to follow rather than manage it. Harry played his first real game of chess, by which he meant his first game where he wasn't deliberately performing a learning curve, and he lost in 12 moves to Ron and 17 to Hermione, and both losses were informative, and the winning move in Hermione's final position was one he almost saw coming and filed for next time. There would be a next time. There were years of next times ahead, stacked up in the future like the towers of the castle stacked up against the night sky, visible from here, full of specifics he couldn't see yet, absolutely and entirely real. He went to bed at 11:30 with the sound of Ron's laughter still in the corridor behind him, and slept without dreaming, and woke the next morning to the specific brightness of a spring Friday in a Scottish castle that knew his name and the smell of Jean's letter, which had arrived overnight and which began, "Charles says Easter is confirmed. Logan has already started planning something with the danger room that I'm told is welcoming, but looks suspiciously like a test. Oraro is making dinner. Come home. And bring your people." Harry read it twice, looked out the dormitory window at the morning, looked back at the letter and thought, both. Not one world and then the other. Not a choice between the institute and the castle, between the people who had found him in Surrey and the people who had found him on the train. Not the question of which half of himself was the real half, the mutant or the wizard, the boy from Westchester or the boy from the prophecy. Both. One system expressing in 2 registers, simultaneously, without contradiction. He got dressed, picked up his bag, and went to find his friends.